right, so I'm happy to welcome Akash back to the channel. We had a really awesome talk last
As I'm
time.
not able to hear you.
Oh, I wonder why. I'm not muted.
I don't know if everybody else can.
Okay. Looks like there's one person watching. Are you able to hear me? Let me mute and unmute real quick. Can you hear me now? No. Okay.
I'm not able to hear you. I'm not sure about the others.
Okay. Check. Okay.
Okay, looks like others are able to hear both of you, but I'm not able to hear. Can you try now?
Check. Testing. Do you want to try?
Actually, you're not coming through my computer audio also.
Okay, let's see. Akash. We just did a sound check.
Let me try to change my headphones once.
Okay. That was a thumbs up. It got cut off with the virtual background, but thumbs up. Any chance you can hear me now, Akash? Or I guess he's changing his headphones there. Testing, check. Check 1, 2, 3. Okay, Akash is muted. Oh, I guess.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, all right, perfect. So like I was saying, Akash and I had a great conversation the last time that we had a stream together, and happy to have him back here. And that's weird that we had that little sound glitch, because we did I was just saying we had done a little sound check kind of thing before, but stuff happens. Technology, it's designed by imperfect individuals, so it's got to be imperfect. But we were actually just talking about this hypothetical that I'd wanted to discuss with Akash during this stream, which I had discussed on a previous stream. And basically this is the idea that I guess it's the central question is whether or not it's okay to do things to non-human animals, which would invariably kind of like violate their rights, so to speak, if we were to derive pleasure from them. And this hypothetical that I'd come up with basically involves someone kind of like having fruit rotting in their room, whereby many fruit flies will be able to kind of propagate themselves on that fruit, and then the person will enjoy swatting them and kind of like let them just propagate for the purpose of swatting them. One of the things that had come up in the previous discussion was excuse me, this idea of societal harm that might cause. For example, like if that would lead that person to then go on to do kind of other things that could be more menacing, I guess, to society, to human society, I suppose, namely. But I'm not sure what your thoughts on that would be, Akash, in general. I mean, I'm pretty sure what your thoughts would be, because I think we both kind of approach this from a similar perspective. But I guess could you see any kind of world where I guess like that would be acceptable, like the swatting of fruit flies like en masse, in order to, or even of one fruit fly, in order to kind of like maximize the pleasure or utility, I guess, that somebody would get from their life?
Okay. So am I still audible?
Yep, very clear.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. One is if the person is deriving enjoyment from swatting flies, right? What is the source of the enjoyment? Is the source of enjoyment the fact that they are committing an act of violence against a living being, or is the source of enjoyment the let's say it's like a competition? I don't consider the fruit flies as beings at all. They're just inanimate, uh, what is that, psychological zombies flying around, and I'm trying to see how many I can kill in a minute or something like that. So I might be deriving a source of enjoyment from the gamification part of it, because I don't consider these things as individuals. One thing. Second thing is I'm actually deriving pleasure from destroying existing living being. So in the second case, when you are actually deriving pleasure from killing something, I absolutely think there is no net positive utility of this in any sense of the word. And it also speaks a lot to the kind of person, because generally I think 99.9% of people I meet as a during outreach, let's say, none of them would condone this swatting flies just for pleasure. As far as the gamification part of it is concerned, where you're trying to compete and you don't consider them as living beings at all, then it's a matter of education, like telling them that this is there are other ways to derive pleasure. I mean, pleasure and other ways to like compete and then kill insects. But in either way, I do not think that is condonable or acceptable.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I agree that that it's not a good thing to do at all, I guess. And you brought up a really interesting concept with regard to the source of the enjoyment, I guess, in terms of like why it's important, I guess. And my only thoughts on that really are that I guess if the enjoyment is derived from the ending of the life, that's probably something that would have more potential to lead to effects on quote unquote, I guess, more sentient beings, or I guess like humans. I guess ultimately would be we would be concerned most with that affecting humans, I would think. And um, something that also comes to mind is um, the idea that I guess the person swatting the flies would be doing so in a way that is kind of fast and quickly killing them. I guess there's this concept that I hear a lot in outreach. Since you mentioned outreach, which is about like punching a pig. Like, is it wrong to punch a pig? Then kind of extrapolates the killing aspect from that. Um, I guess in the fruit fly example, it's kind of built into the hypothetical that they'd be their lives would be ended very quickly. But ultimately, I think that what that does, the ending of the life very quickly, what that kind of does is makes it a situation of the life being ended, basically, as opposed to like it doesn't introduce a suffering element to it. Um, so I guess from a perspective of like however we were to extrapolate it, whether it would be from that person doing acts upon humans, etc., it would be basically a source of enjoyment that we can just take as a given, that it's not the killing that the person is enjoying. It's just kind of like this they like being like kind of like um sporty about it, I guess, kind of hopping around and swatting flies and things like that. And they're not torturing them or causing them like egregious amounts of suffering, or maybe not causing them suffering at all, but they're basically bringing life into the world and then ending the life at their will. Another example that we could switch to is this idea of pickled fetus, basically. So basically, in this hypothetical, it sounds kind of crazy, but basically, this thing I had thought of, where I had thought of this. I mean, I talked about this in my live stream with Jerome Eubanks, but this is something I had thought about before too. It's kind of just been evolving, um, where basically there's this hypothetical woman who is intentionally conceiving babies, and she's letting them live with it, in her womb up till about 6 months, and then she's just ending their lives through a painless abortion method, and then she's basically like she's harvesting basically the baby from her womb and putting the babies in like a pickle jar kind of thing, like, you know, on a mantle, like, or something like that, you know, just like making like a backdrop by her fireplace. And the only reason that she's conceiving the babies is in order to make this like decorative piece. Let's just say it's, you know, in her house, or maybe she wants to submit it to a museum or something like that, who knows. But she's basically bringing these babies into existence, so she's giving them life basically, and then she's taking that life at will. Do you see any issue with that, I guess, ethically, on ethical grounds?
So you are drawing the line at 6 months.
You know, what's interesting is that so Jerome had a talk with Carson, and I had brought this up, Carson, Reasonable Vegan, um, and I had brought this up to hear Carson's thoughts on it, specifically, since I had already talked to Jerome about it. And Carson had said that, you know, he said, like, would this apply? He had asked rather if it would apply to a like a one year old, or does it specifically need to be a fetus? I think he had asked that. I think that came up somehow, and I was like, yeah, it doesn't really matter if they're in utero or if they're alive. Um, so yeah, I mean, it could apply. It could apply to a 1 year old as well. It could apply, I guess, I suppose, to any age, just so long as there was only well-being that being experienced. And maybe that's the benefit of just keeping them at 6 months, just because I guess there's. I mean, actually, that's not true. That they can experience harm in the womb as well. But I guess um, in this hypothetical, they're just experiencing well-being. They're brought into the existence that they wouldn't have otherwise been brought into, and they're brought into existence with the sole purpose of being eventually, you know, killed and pickled. Um, so yeah, I guess it wouldn't matter if they were in utero or if they were born.
Oh, okay. Then I have a complicated thing about this, because this directly deals with abortion, right? Although you're saying the woman herself produces kids and aborts them. I mean, the woman chooses to become pregnant and aborts them and wants to keep them as a display piece, right?
Yeah.
Uh, if it is so, it is directly leads into my view on abortion. So I am strongly pro-life. I mean pro-choice. I'm so sorry. I'm strongly pro-choice. So if the fetus does not have sentience, if the fetus does not have a functioning nervous system, I do not see the fetus either experiencing well-being or suffering. In that case, I think it's the woman only who's going through the uh, part of that. So if the abortion is happening before the woman, before the fetus is sentient, and I'm not saying I know when the fetus is being sentient. Let's say we have a specific metric to know that this is the point when a fetus becomes sentient. Then assuming that this abortion is happening before sentience, and assuming that no other rights are being violated of any other individual other than the choice of that woman, then I really don't see any. I wouldn't do it. I mean, it sounds very weird, but as a hypothetical, I do not see how it is going to affect people. Rather, but here this is assuming that the fetus hasn't reached sentience. If there is any chance that the fetus has sentience, then this is absolutely unacceptable.
Okay. Um, I want to push you a little bit on one aspect of this, if I could. So,
Sure.
I know that with regard to the definition of veganism, you don't value sentience, right? You value whether they're a member of the animal kingdom, insofar as like defining veganism's parameters, I guess, about who is acceptable.
It's not that I do not value sentience. I value it. In fact, it is the core. But I am willing to accept that even the lowest part of the earliest evolutionary forms of the animal kingdom also have sentience. I mean, it is something which
Mm.
I'm granting so that I don't have to think about consuming them or commodifying them in any way. So this is not to say that I do not value sentience.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. Sorry,
sentience
yeah,
actually
I
forms
didn't,
the core.
and I didn't mean to imply that. I
Yeah,
just mean, you know, with respect to the definition. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, so I guess yeah, and I guess these definitions on, or these discussions on sentience can get kind of um, almost unrecognizably hazy in a way, where we're kind of like, we're always looking at sentience through our own lenses, through our own nervous systems, things like that. And a lot of times I think we assume that we know what other beings' experiences are like, and we assume whether or not they value their lives and things like that. um, anyway, I don't know if it's a worthwhile avenue to get into with regard to like sentience hierarchies and that kind of thing. And I know that today we were going to kind of focus a lot um, on the different aspects of outreach and things like that. But
Outreach. Yes.
I guess just to kind of tie a loop, so to speak, on the pickled baby thing. Yeah, I would say that I would agree with you, and I think maybe where I might disagree is like, I'm not sure. I think if the mom, let's say that we knew that the a baby is absolutely non-sentient at 2 months and 30 days of life, and that all of a sudden, like a light switch, they gain sentience right at 3 months. um, if the mom was, if she was conceiving embryos, fetuses, whatever, in order to pickle them when they're 2 months of age, um, or I don't know if you're familiar with like the Durga, the Kali Ma Durga, like the goddess who has like the necklace. Like maybe she wants them a little bit smaller, so she can put them in these little orbs that are all around her, or something like that, in these like little glass vestibule things. Like uh, if she was conceiving them intentionally, like maybe she has a business. Maybe she's only able to produce like 6 or 7 of these in her whole lifetime, and she sells them for like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she's just conceiving these babies just to basically profit off of them. um, or just to get enjoyment. Maybe she just wants them a little bit smaller, like on like a little border, like a door frame or something like that. She's going to embed them in there. I mean, still, I think that um, if she's doing it at 2 months of age, like I don't know if I necessarily think that it's okay for someone to bring lives like into, to basically give incarnation to other beings. um, and assume that, I guess, because the way that I think of it is it's similar to the fruit fly example, in that some people will argue that a fruit fly is much less sentient than like a full-fledged adult human, for example. And I don't know how this case would be very different. I understand that in the case of an abortion, it's not something that a woman, I would think, ever really plans to have happen. It's generally in the case of an unwanted pregnancy that they have to make a very difficult choice about. But in this hypothetical, the pregnancy is intentional, and it's premeditated. So I do think that does matter in this case, and I think that it's important to recognize that matters, and the implications of that mattering versus not mattering, as it pertains to even things like crop deaths and things like that. I think when we think about intention, that really really matters.
That's right. Intention matters a lot. So I have a something similar to this. What would you say? This is actually an idea given to me by my sister, who's also a vegan.
Oh, great.
So what if that woman who was like repeatedly conceiving, and there were a bunch of women who, instead of, let's say, conceiving and making a business of fetuses, instead decided to sell breast milk as
Hmm.
a collective, right? Let's say they were hormonally injecting themselves to produce human milk, and they sell them. Do you think it's ethical to drink that?
And let me just be clear on the fetus part. So they're not killing the babies and making fetuses and things like that, right? In this example.
They're not getting pregnant. They're just inducing milk production and producing milk as a commodity by
Okay.
choice.
So
By choice.
yeah. So So there's no baby involved at all.
No,
Um,
no.
they're just basically like um, through mechanical or drug-based means, or somehow they're increasing their prolactin to a point where they just start lactating and they're
Yeah,
producing milk.
something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I don't see any problem with that at all.
Cool. That's fine.
Um,
That's all I needed to know. Yeah.
yeah, but I think that if they do, let's say let's say that it was able to render a woman able to lactate when, let's say, this example of the 2 month old, or not 2 month old, sorry, let's say they deliver a baby and they're basically, I guess it's almost like the pickled baby hypothetical, except let's say they're not actively like hurting the baby in the sense of they're not like being violent toward them, they're not killing the baby, they're not ending the baby's life painlessly for that matter. But let's say they're getting pregnant because they for the sole reason that they can sell their breast milk. Um, so basically, they're not giving their breast milk that they're pumping out of themselves to their baby, and they're instead selling it. If their
That
reason,
wouldn't be vegan.
yeah, I wouldn't think so. I mean, um, but that being said, I mean, it kind of gets into a territory of, I mean, like if there's a mother and I guess yeah, I guess you would have to have a good reason for not wanting to use that milk that she's producing for her
Baby.
baby. I could see a scenario where, let's say there's a woman in a very like impoverished area, or maybe she's just in a very bad situation, and if she can sell her breast milk, and like, let's say selling her breast milk is the only way that she's able to provide food, like other food for that baby. Um, I could see that as being fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And even in the situation, I mean, like, um, for example, like I had met this farmer at a Cube of Truth once. I believe this was in Santa Monica. Um, the cubes there were just insane, by the way. It was like in this very, very busy promenade where there's just so many people walking by that um, so many people are stopped all around the cube. And you really have to weigh up at that point whether the conversation that you're in is worth continuing or not, because um, there's so many people stopped and they only stop for a few seconds sometimes, and you have to determine if the person you're talking to is receptive enough or willing enough to make a change. So it's a very, very high stakes environment, so to speak. But there was one gentleman who, he was a cow farmer from somewhere in Africa, which he said was extremely kind of deserted, like basically like a desert, and he didn't have any means by which to grow vegetation, and that his cattle, I don't know if that's a vegan term to use, I would think so, but his cattle basically were his only kind of source of income, and the only like the only way that he could basically survive himself. um it's kind of like that situation, I guess, with the breast milk, and not having any other means to make money without maybe putting oneself in danger and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely, I sympathize with that kind of situation, and I hope that we could get to a point where people wouldn't have to exploit animals for their sustenance. Um,
But one issue I see with these hypotheticals is once it becomes a business, it is ripe for exploitation. I do not think we can escape that. I mean, it's a very small step from voluntarily selling your fetuses or milk to being exploited by somebody else to mass produce it. That is a step we are willing to take with regards to any business. So that is a problem that I see whenever anything becomes a business or a commodity. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's a valid concern. I mean, I know, like in the case of backyard eggs, for example, people will say like, "Oh, what's the problem if I have a chicken in my backyard and I take their eggs?" I mean, besides the obvious fact that they more than likely wouldn't have that chicken if she weren't producing eggs, there's also the idea that, yeah, it can develop into a full fledged business, and I'm not sure if that's a slippery slope fallacy or not, but I think it's something that we've kind of seen bear out. Um,
Yeah, it's a slope. It doesn't mean that there is a horrible end at the end of it, but it is a slope. It is ripe for slopiness, exploitation. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, I think that's a great segue to this what we just talked about like 20 seconds ago, with regard to like the necessity of like exploitation in some scenarios, where a person might not have any other means by which to survive. That I think would be a great segue to talking about slaughterhouse workers.
Slaughterhouse. Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just want to share a little story. So um, there was a time when I went to a slaughterhouse, and there was somebody working there who was behind this fence, and we could kind of barely see them. I think the fence was just like, the fence basically obscured the grounds of the slaughterhouse very much. Excuse me, but there was somebody on the perimeter, and one of the people who was there, this was for a vigil. So this was for basically being present to witness the animals being kind of trucked into their deaths. And this worker was at the perimeter, and somebody who was there for the vigil was speaking with him, and he was saying that he was very upset and saddened, I guess, with the fact that he was doing that kind of work, working in a slaughterhouse. And he was sharing that he felt that his God was, hey, Lewis, good to see you. He felt that his God was basically like ashamed of him as well, or like he wasn't doing right in the eyes of his creator, I guess. He didn't put in those exact words, but basically, this was a conversation where the person talking to him, and this essentially turned into an outreach conversation, was saying that he didn't have to do that. And he was like, yeah, I know, like I can leave this, etc. My point being, like, I've witnessed firsthand how people have been working in these situations and not wanted to work there. I've also seen that in areas where there may be a high level of immigration without the, I guess, necessary legal paperwork and things like that, that individuals whose immigration statuses may not be legal have been exploited specifically for these slaughterhouse jobs. And another thing I've seen is that the industry, I think this was something that I heard from, I believe, the Cranky Vegan had and I haven't actually seen this video from Cranky Vegan, but um, I believe it was Vegan Pundit who was live um, on a live stream. I don't remember exactly who the live stream was with. I think it might have been with Vegan for Kindness, but I'm not sure.
Yes.
In
Could
any
be that
case,
one. Yeah.
okay. But in any case, basically, I heard that he had heard from this video on Cranky Vegan's channel that some kind of internal memo from the animal abusing industries was leaked or something, I believe.
Oh yeah, the list of 10 things that
Yes,
yeah, I think the top one was lobbyist or something like that. Yeah.
I believe so. And I think
Yeah.
I think maybe second or third was awareness about like slaughterhouse work and exploitation of people, like kind of human rights related things as it pertains to that vocation, which I just thought that was really interesting. And I think it shows that those industries are aware that we share a concern with other human beings. At least, when I say we, I mean like it's generally the case that humans will care about other humans, to sometimes to an extreme degree, in comparison to how much we care about other animals. And I think that's kind of true for all of us to some extent. Um, and I think we see examples of speciesism even in the lives of vegans. But I thought that was really interesting. And another thing that that I've seen in the kind of like slaughterhouse worker situation is that a lot of people will be exploited to work there, including, I guess, people who aren't, or I guess rather, people will be exploited for those places to open, is what I meant. Like there will be places that are impoverished, like kind of on the outskirts of a city, where a slaughterhouse will pollute the waterways. Um, they'll end up sometimes spraying like waste matter on fields, and blood will be running in the around the dumpsters. Sometimes, like there will be conditions that aren't up to city health code, things like, for in many instances, and the people who suffer and get like respiratory cancers, things like that, as a result of it, are often the people who have nothing to do with those places. And another thing, I guess, as it pertains to the effect on the slaughterhouse workers who don't want to be there, is that oftentimes drug abuse is rampant in these places, where people will, I guess, supposedly, because I don't have any firsthand experience with this, but they'll kind of show up to work on drugs, which may or may not be to kind of dissociate themselves from what they're participating in. And rates of crimes like domestic violence have also been shown to be higher in those cases. Lewis says it's extremely rare that someone. I just figured out how to do this, by the way. I can show a comment on here.
Yeah, I saw that.
Someone can be forced to work in a slaughterhouse unless they're a child whose parents would basically force them. Even poverty isn't typically forcing, but because there's often an alternative. Yeah. And the other thing that it flashed in my mind, and then I had forgotten it, and then it flashed again. So I just want to say before I forget, is that I've heard of even cases where I believe it was maybe Canada that took refugees from Syria, I want to say. I'm not totally sure on this, but I remember reading something of that along those lines, where people were basically forced, more or less forced, into working at a slaughterhouse in exchange for asylum, which you would think that there were people with very high levels of education potentially, and all they were trying to do was just escape a dangerous situation in their home country. And then what do they find themselves wearing an apron and needing to kill pigs for a living. I believe Lewis is, I think he's saying about that. I'm not sure exactly on the specifics of this, but I believe it was Canada granting asylum to people from Syria, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I believe this was like a few years ago, and those were the people involved, but not sure again. But yeah,
I have a couple of
Sure.
thoughts. Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, you can go on if you had
No, I was just
something.
saying, when we look at the situation as a whole in terms of slaughterhouse workers and the things that they experience from fear of getting deported if they don't work where they are, fear of being subjected to violence because of brutal regimes in their own country if they don't go and work there. And I guess we look at the downstream effects on communities in terms of violence and health hazards. There's so many psychological and physical impacts of a slaughterhouse opening somewhere. Not
Yeah.
to mention
So
the human hazard of just saying, like, I'm going to open a slaughterhouse, like, that kind of thing. It's just horrible all around.
So, couple of things I've noticed is that there are studies which many of them actually, I'll share some of them with you, which say that slaughterhouse workers suffer from both physical and mental health issues. Right, the physical ones are definitely because of the less than optimal working conditions and the spread of disease from animals. The
Yeah,
mental
and
ones
I'm sorry
can,
to
yeah,
cut you off there, but I mean, the physical one can even extend to the conditions on the job, like
on the job.
I think that slaughterhouse work actually has, like, I think the kill floor person actually, that position has the highest level of on the job physical injuries, I believe, of any
Yes.
profession in terms of like um, bruises, cuts, lacerations, all that stuff,
Yeah,
amputation.
especially with large animals and cows, I can understand, and pigs. It's a violent process, and they will get injured. Mental health. I mean, the rates of addiction, depression, PTSD, all that are higher. I will confirm. I will send the links across for these studies.
Akash,
And
I'm wondering.
interesting, yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Have you ever heard of PITS?
Uh, it sounds
So
very familiar.
okay, yeah, it's kind of this uh,
Some trauma
analog, for the
syndrome,
lack of a
right?
better word. I'm sorry.
Some trauma syndrome, perpetrator induced trauma syndrome, if
Yes,
I'm
yeah,
right.
exactly. So
Yes,
that's
yes,
another
it
thing that,
happens.
yes,
Yeah, yeah, definitely, I can see it happening. There is a psychic numbing. There will be PTSD. There will be increased addiction. For instance, when I was working in a government hospital, right, and we do not have a forensic or a pathology department. So there is a bunch of people whose job is only to deal with cadavers, right? So they remove all the organs and just stitch them up and send the organs to the pathology lab and all. And this group of people has the highest rate of alcoholism that I have seen.
wow,
They are incapable of doing this sober. I mean, this is not passing a judgment on them at all. I'm just saying that there are certain jobs which is probably for them, as you said, in the case of immigrants with whose legal status is unknown. Also, with many people for whom this is absolutely the most or highest paying job they could have gotten at that point, right? So,
yeah. I want
in
to put
both
this
these cases,
comment. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, Rooted Sunshine said something very similar to that last thing you
yeah,
said.
yeah, exactly. I agree with her. Yeah. So that's it. So for most people, it is the best job that they can have, and I don't see any reason to be to. I mean, we should be able to extend all our empathy, all our compassion to them, instead of like grouping them in as murderers or something that they want to do.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind that I wanted to bring up is that I remember at one point I had seen activists, like vegan activists, putting on um, I believe they had called it a vigil for slaughterhouse workers. So they were trying to raise awareness about what these animal, or what I mean, what the killers of these animals were kind of subject to and going through themselves. And I've seen also criticisms of that, of the idea of putting on a vigil for humans, because people who criticize it would assert that the focus should be on non-humans, and that it's kind of ludicrous to kind of hold space, for the lack of a better word, um, for and to consider the plight of the people who are like literally wielding the knives. Um, but I do think that you know I, I think that people don't really get into that by choice, and I think they are being exploited. And I mean, I think a lot of people are being exploited, whether they're working at a 9 to 5 in a big corporation, just sitting at a desk all day, or whether they're on a slaughterhouse kill floor. But I think in the cases of the slaughterhouse work, it's a unique type of kind of dirty work that nobody really wants to do. And as we were discussing, it's highly traumatizing, and a person is almost forced to numb themselves. I've seen things written from slaughterhouse workers, but they've also said, like, um, you have to basically forget that they're animals. Like, when you first arrive, they'll tell you they're not animals. Just don't see them as animals. See them as machines. And that's the only way you can kind of like get through the day. Um, so yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
it's 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 a horrible, crazy hazard.
I don't see any logical reason to target the person who is doing the actual killing, and to differentiate how you behave towards the person who is doing the dirty work from the person who is paying them to do the dirty work, right? If
Yeah,
I were to be disgusted by a slaughterhouse worker while am showing empathy towards a meat eater, that shows a moral inconsistency from my part. So if I have to extend empathy to meat eaters so that I can educate them. We'll talk about this during the outreach discussion, of course. Then I should be able to extend the same compassion to the person who's finally doing the actual killing also. I don't see any difference in why they should be treated different from those who are eating meat eaters. In the sense, I believe compassion should be extended to all of them.
yeah, I agree. And I think something that is interesting to know is I had done an outreach once where um, the person I had spoke to, I believe he had said that his father had worked in like some stockyards, quote unquote, where uh, I think that was the case, but I don't want to misquote, but something had happened where um, his dad had seen some things that made him not want to like consume animal flesh that still resembled an animal. It had to be kind of all ground up and things like that. Um, so it's very foreseeable in my mind that a person would even get to a point where they wouldn't want anything to do with animal flesh after having worked um, in that environment.
Absolutely, I agree with
Um, all right, so um, I think I think that we might have said kind of all that there really is to say about that topic. I guess
you. Yes,
for the most part, as far as productive discussion. But I think it's really a beneficial thing if we could talk. It would be a beneficial thing if we could talk about outreach and kind of like and messaging and strategies to kind of conduct outreach. I think a lot of my viewers also find that kind of stuff really helpful. Kind of like not just like the basic like addressing common objection stuff, although that's fine too, but kind of more strategies, I guess, where a person could make the connection, I guess, after listening to a certain argument or a certain line of argumentation. And I think it's also good to kind of talk a little bit about to what degree infighting, as far as like how we present veganism or how we define veganism, could be beneficial. And I guess how we ought to kind of um, enforce, for the lack of a better word, um, those decisions. I guess maybe before we get ahead of ourselves, um, I'd want to ask you, like, what do you think is the main sociological restraint to people going vegan? Like, um, from a society-wide perspective, like, what do you think is, or maybe rather than asking you to boil it down to one, I guess, what would you consider kind of the main, the things structurally speaking, like institutionally speaking, that inhibit a person's decision toward going vegan?
Okay, so from the experience of my outreach, which has been only in South India for now, all the most of the people, as I said, sent you in the mail also, most of the people, their base positions on anything are a patchwork of culture, their religion, the place where they were brought up. So a lot of it goes there. Most my experience has been that all each and every person I have talked to has been kind. They have I haven't had a conversation with somebody who has said that it is better to be unkind than kind, to anything, to humans or animals. I haven't met anybody who's taking that position. But the barrier mainly, of course, all of them are except the people who are actually farmers, the in the metropolis, most of them are suffering from severe cognitive dissonance. I mean, the uh, the way the socio-political economic s- reality in India is structured, makes it almost invariable that somebody will be either vegetarian and will consume lots of dairy. The barriers to this are many. Institutionally, there is a lot of support towards milk. In fact, milk has become a political issue in India, but you won't believe it's not whether one should drink milk or not. The issue is which brand of milk to drink.
Hmm.
So there are some state governments which are fighting, saying that only this brand should be drunk, not the other brand. So though it has become political to such an extent where it's already assumed that you have to drink milk, but now they're arguing about which brand to promote or whatever cronyism happening there. That is one institutional thing. But most of the objections I have are basically cultural. I mean, we have always been doing this. It's part of our religion. It's part of. It's how I've grown up. It's what my family or this thing have taught me. All these are barriers, but ultimately it boils down to cognitive dissonance and giving them information that will actually make them think. Because most of the people I've seen, it's not that they want to be unkind. It's that they're just too busy living their lives, dealing with their struggles, that they haven't thought about this at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind about, I appreciate you're bringing all those different aspects up, and I want to touch on those. Something that kind of came to mind is this idea of disconnectedness when a person is in a metropolitan area and they're able to participate in the animal exploiting cycle very disconnectedly. Um, One thing that I had seen, I don't remember if it was on like Vice News or what. It was on some channel where it said like it was something like I'm just paraphrasing here because this wasn't the title, but it was like city kids meet their meat, or like urban hipsters see where their meat comes from, or something like that. And the thumbnail, I believe, had this a picture of like a young lady crying. Um, Something that kind of comes to mind is um, the aspect of like when that connection ought to be reinforced or taught or shown to kids in their development, to kind of prevent that kind of disconnectedness. But something else that comes to mind related to that is whether or not doing so ends up desensitizing people at an early age. And then you end up with people who basically have that mindset of the people in those farming communities where it's just like what they're used to and it's a way of life and that kind of thing. I had seen this interesting discussion the other day about whether or not dominion and things like that should be shown to children in schools. And something that I had read was that it might be a bad idea to show it to kids when they're early enough to be lied to, essentially, and kind of like um, and told arguments that they don't really have the ability to reject and refute at that early age. And that, you know, there's also the argument that it can traumatize them kind of like unnecessarily, for the lack of a better word, or that it could bring situations to rise where they're not at an old enough age to take action if their parents end up kind of starving them and neglecting them and things like that as a result of they're not participating in it. And also, I think like when you know when a person is more in the kind of early teen ages, they have more of a rebellious kind of attitude a lot of times. So I had seen it. Someone had said that it might be a better idea to wait till they're like 12 or 13 as opposed to showing that kind of footage to like 5 or 6 year olds. I guess this is something else that in that list of 10 things was something highlighted where it's like, you know, early education of people, of children on these issues was a threat to those industries. um, I think like the things that you mentioned about um, uh, the political, I guess, debates about this company or that company and that kind of thing. All of that kind of starts because as children, people are taught that, you know, it's normal to breastfeed from a cow and things like that. And of course, I think religion obviously plays a huge role in that. Um, but yeah, I think the way to kind of address all of that is just kind of starting where that information is being disseminated, uh, where and when, like early on.
So I call this institutional dilution of cognitive dissonance, right? So there are so many ways in which these companies try to dilute the amount of dissonance by just, I mean, instead of by calling it meat, for instance, or pork or bacon instead of pig, or I mean, by using words which dissociate the
Yeah.
animal from the product, right? So this is just the smallest example, but I think there are like a million ways in which these companies try to dilute the cognitive dissonance that they know people are going to feel. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt that anybody who is eating, who's consuming animals, will at know when they see the actual, when they understand the actual reality, they are going to feel cognitive dissonance. So euphemisms. So
Yeah.
the lengths to which these companies go to dilute this dissonance is insane.
Yeah, and I think these euphemisms, there's a benefit to the people who are pushing those quote unquote products, and there's a benefit to the people who are consuming them. The
Yes.
people who are pushing them benefit from the disconnectedness within the cities and things like that. Um, it almost seems like, in a way, though, as kind of as alluding to what I said earlier, if people do remain disconnected to a certain point, it almost seems to benefit the vegan cause, because you can be like, hey, look what you've been paying for, as compared to if somebody grew up in an environment, not necessarily where they were exposed to something like dominion and violence. If we can maybe circle back real quick to that topic, of just like of seeing traumatic things, in slaughterhouse, I guess. There's just insightful comments here. Vegan pundit referred to the PITS condition. Um, and Lewis also mentioned that um, people sometimes have a choice to work in a slaughterhouse. Like, as vegans, we might not do it. Um, and yeah, there's been a lot of great comments about the slaughterhouse topic. But I think as pertaining to like witnessing what happens in a slaughterhouse, we don't necessarily have to even witness it, um,
No.
just to find that at a young age, like, we know what's going on. Some children, when they're growing up, they'll be well aware, like their parents will be very open with them about the fact that they're eating a pig or eating a cow, or maybe eating a dog in certain parts of the world. And they might walk by dogs in cages and dogs being strewn up and roasted and things like that, um, when they're 3 or 4 years old. So it might not seem problematic to them. I see that as a huge concern when it comes to doing outreach with that person when they're like 21, 22 years old. You know what I mean? Like, I see that as a really, really, really difficult thing to do, when a person has been raised in an environment in which they're surrounded by transparent and normalized uh, violent exploitation.
Yep, I agree. That's a big concern. And yeah,
So I
sorry, I
guess,
lost my train of
oh
thought.
no, it's all good. Something that comes to mind, I guess, just to kind of do a little thought experiment, is like, would we consider it beneficial to veganism as a whole to have people, uh, if you could have like, some kind of, trying to think of an example that's not too outlandish. I was thinking of, like aliens coming down and starting to slaughter these kind of like, let's say there's a fictional animal who who doesn't exist right now or something. I don't know what the point it would be of them being fictional, but I mean, let's just say that whatever animals are slaughtered in whatever locale, um, if that slaughter starts being carried out in the open, would there be a benefit to the vegan movement? Like, you know, in would the fact that people see that out in the open kind of almost function like, here's Dominion now? You know what I mean? Kind of a thing. Like, would it be like people seeing Dominion and then deciding that they were done with it? It kind of, I guess, brings up the idea of like something like a cube of truth. Um,
Yes.
I guess the way that I have participated in activism is under the assumption that people seeing this footage is going to help people decide to stop contributing to those industries. Um, but I could also see it having a backfiring effect in some cases where people might just be like where kids walking by specifically might just be like, okay, this is planet Earth, like it's totally messed up, but like that's what it is, and then growing up not being phased at all by that egregious violence.
Yeah. So, from my experience, so one of the ways we do outreach here is, as I said, we have posters, right? So one side of the poster just has a provocative statement. The behind the poster, there are pictures of the actual things happening in the industry. Now, from my experience, we just start with the question, go with the conversation, and at the end we turn it around and show them what is happening. But for me, if I have to show what is behind the poster, I have lost.
Hmm.
I firmly believe that just by educating and telling them, and just by asking questions and pointing out the inconsistencies and allowing them to figure it out and finding out themselves, I think has a better effect rather than starting off by showing all the trauma that is happening. Because uh, that's the way I became vegan, right? I didn't become vegan because I saw Dominion, or I mean, I've seen people, humans are going through these things. And it's not that I consider humans more valuable than this thing, but I am desensitized to some extent. It wasn't Dominion which changed me. In fact, I watched it after I became vegan. I became vegan because I saw that it was absolutely unnecessary, irrational, and cruel. And literally, I think 5 days after become vegan, it just caught up to me one night. One night, I just broke down thinking, "What have I done all my life?" It just came to me. I didn't have to look at anything or see anything to realize that this is what is happening. I mean, the animals could have been living the best possible life, that is fine, but I am I was horrified at what I had done. So
Yeah,
even in my outreach, I prefer this. I prefer to ask questions, do street epistemology as much as possible, and if they are interested in knowing what is actually happening, then I will show them, right?
yeah,
But I firmly believe that I should be able to convince them, educate them, plant the seed without having to turn the poster around.
yeah. I have a few things to say and then a question. I think that I guess let me just share a background story. Like for me, I knew for a while after I'd stopped eating animals, but was still consuming things like dairy. I knew that that came from cows. Um, but for some reason, I think I didn't even realize that they had to become impregnated first, for example, which is kind of embarrassing. I was like in my 20s. Um, Another thing that I think people don't think about is how the conditions are. And that's not to say that we should be okay with good conditions. But when just looking at my own experience, it was absolutely the case that I had never seen even a snapshot, even a glimpse into these places where these cows were just like, you know, in these shitty conditions, hooked up to machines and things like that. And when I saw that, it just like it kind of like it's not, it wouldn't have really made a difference if the cow was being shown like, imagine some kind of like heaven like atmosphere or something. It's all bright and airy and there's like ribbons in their hair and stuff like that. It wouldn't have made it any better. I wouldn't have been like, wow, this is okay. It's more the fact that like when I saw that, I was like, it was almost like I was seeing something like pornographic. You know what I mean? It was like very very explicit and very disturbing. Just the fact that these beings were being exploited in this way, and that they were just kind of like sitting there and they were subject to what these people were perpetrating upon them. Um, but I want to, without getting too much into that side of things and that story, I guess. I wanted to ask you a question about that sign. And I guess maybe before I ask you that, something that comes to mind, I guess, in terms of using logic to get through to people and help them make that connection, um, is that I've heard before that people kind of don't make like life changing decisions, or I don't want to like declare something like that, but kind of that they don't necessarily implement these changes that we're hoping that they'll implement with logic alone, and that there needs to be a kind of emotional aspect to it. And that's not to say that we should be making arguments from emotion, but I think that it's very helpful if there's something that kind of activates a compassionate kind of mode of thinking within a person. Um, and kind of, and that logic kind of like drives it home in their brain. But I think ultimately that moment where that person just like is like, okay, like I'm not going to be participating in this anymore, and they kind of like give up their defenses. I think that you can't really do that without appealing to them on a heart based level, like on an emotional level to some extent. um, I mean, of course, the opposite is bad too. You know, if we're not um, using any kind of logical argumentation, and a person just completely from an emotional perspective just says like, oh, this is terrible, and they're not thinking at all, they're basically going to feel kind of like helpless, and they could end up kind of sliding into this learned helplessness scenario where they're basically doing something that they hate doing, and they don't see a way out of it either. um, but I see the emotional side of it as maybe more necessary, because I
Oh,
can't.
okay. I
Yeah,
have a couple of responses to that.
sure.
Uh, when I said logic, actually, I misspoke. I meant rational.
Hmm.
So, when I meant rational, I meant, of course, when I talk to them, half of it is not only informative, it's an appeal to emotion also. But the appeal to emotion is comes from their side. So, if they are rationally, I mean, if they are some, you first establish that they are kind and compassionate people, right? So then the irrational thing is, when you are kind and compassionate in this part of your life, why are you not kind and compassionate in the other part of your life? So that is an actually an appeal to emotion only, because that kindness is an emotion that they are feeling towards a certain animal, let's say, or humans, or a certain species, or a certain group. So once we establish that this kindness is there, the thing is, it is kind of irrational to be kind in this way in this part of your life, but not in that part of your life. So that is an appeal to emotion. I'm not saying that emotion should be out of the equation. We
Yeah,
definitely use appeals to emotion, but they should be rational. I mean, the rationality part is to point out the moral inconsistency. I mean,
yeah,
so maybe logic was not the correct word. I would prefer rational.
sure. I understand. One thing that I think what you're saying kind of can be summarized as is we're basically, to some extent, we're appealing to hypocrisy, um, in the sense that
Yes.
we're saying that you're participating in something that is not logically consistent in terms of selectively applying your sense of justice and fairness, basically. And at the same
Yes.
time, we're saying that you ought to feel for these beings, and kind of trying to spark some kind of sense of righteous anger in a way. Um, One of the things I found to be most effective is talking to people about what they see on the screens. And this is maybe when I say most effective, of course, I don't mean most effective in getting people to go vegan. I don't have access to those metrics, unfortunately. Um, but I do think that um, it has helped me bring myself clarity in terms of, when you ask a question and you're not totally clear on what that question could entail for that person, it hurts your ability as a listener to reach understanding.
Can you
Whether
give me an example of that?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll just say what this question is. So I've asked people before, when they see what's happening on the screens, sometimes I'll say, do you hate what you see? Like, do you hate the fact that humans are doing this to, like, what you see on the screens, to other animals? Um, and that the answer to that tells me so much, um, if they say yes or no. And what it also helps a person do is exercise their agency and confirm to themselves, like, I think it's very beneficial when we're doing outreach to ask these kind of like indicator questions, and questions that kind of signify steps within the conversation. Um, you'll see people do outreach, for example, like where there's a person named Very Vegan Mom, and she had done
Yeah.
something where she had a sign. I believe it said like 3 questions for animal lovers. I just saw this last night, so I haven't had a lot of time to really think about it. But basically, I think it said like the first one was like, do you love animals? The second, or maybe that was built into this to the question, but something where she was basically asking people how they felt about animal abuse and animal abusers, and then asking them. I think the third question was like, um, in what ways do you contribute to it, or do you pay for it
Do you
with
consume it? Yeah, I think that's
purchasing?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think, and also this brings to mind this workshop that Paul Bashir had done, where it was called Holding Non-Vegans Accountable, and there have been a few different iterations of it. I think the last I saw was like 3.0, but basically he has presented in this workshop the idea that basically the reason that people go vegan and um, I guess stay vegan by extension would be that we don't want to be hypocrites. Like we don't want to have this idea that we're about fairness and justice toward other beings while living non-vegan. Um, and I think that like it really there's a lot to be said for it. Like in that workshop he had said like how many of you like who here eats only a whole food plant-based diet, and maybe I don't know how many people raised their hand, but it wasn't much. um, and then he's like, and how many people went vegan because they just didn't want to be hypocrites, and thinking about themselves as a fair, rational, just person. And I think that you brought up a really amazing point in referring to the cognitive dissonance that people have around their double standards, essentially, toward other animals.
Yeah. Uh,
So I had a
I
question about
agree.
that sign.
Yeah.
Um, is the reason that you don't show the sign? Is there anything being imposed upon you guys by any kind of like authorities or anything like that
No,
about?
no. This
Okay.
was my personal decision.
Okay.
Uh, so couple of things. One is, unless the other person is convinced that one should not consume or commodify animals, if I turn around and show this, first they will first go to welfare. I mean, they'll, if they are not convinced that they should not consume this in the first place, if I show them the graphic rape racks and the congested or the maceration and all, their first response is, okay, what can we do to improve this? What can we do to make this better, right? But I would rather I show them the footage once they are convinced that they will not, that it is irrational and wrong to commodify and consume animals or their products. Once they are convinced, then I can show them the this thing, because then they will write, their mind will not go towards welfare at all. It will go towards, okay, now how do I go to stop this? I don't know whether studies have been done on this, but I think this should be an area of study where the long term effects of showing this footage before convincing people that they shouldn't be non vegan, versus showing them the footage first and then trying to convince them to be non vegan. I mean, there are no studies, but this is what I feel.
Yeah. I think Vegan Pundit and Lewis were talking about this in the comments, and we're talking about, I guess, whether maybe showing that footage can lead people um, to kind of
Oh, yeah.
promote or adopt welfare reforms. I think it's a really really important topic. Um, I think like it's also interesting because it gets to this whole idea of like best use of time, and we of course we don't want to ever spend our time promoting welfarist measures, and I don't, this is something that's very convoluted because in a sense, like, if I were being farmed on, in a factory farm, I wouldn't want to be treated worse before I was killed. You know what I mean? I'd want to be treated better. Um, but it's such a catch 22 kind of thing, because we want these animals' rights to not be violated. And it could be argued. I mean, I've heard reasonable vegans say something along the lines of like the ways that the cruel conditions are imposed upon these animals entails rights violations. If we want to think
Yeah,
from
he says if you make the cage bigger, you are providing more rights than if the cage was smaller. I think that's what he meant.
and so yeah, I understand that kind of reasoning. It's not beyond me. I think the main thing that dissuades me from sympathy or support, I guess, for the welfare's position is the fact that I really think that having those measures put into law has the effect of easing people's consciences and convincing them that it's being done in a good way. Because I mean, when you think about this whole marketing effort of like, free range, cage free, grass fed, organic, pasture raised, non GMO, antibiotic free, growth hormone free, humanely raised, cruelty free, hormone free, all this stuff. I wrote a song actually that used those words. That's why I can spit them
Mhm.
out so fast.
Okay.
But this is a recent thing, kind of, where people will um, feel very good about buying those products and say like, well, I only buy the high welfare, I promote the high welfare, or like, I'm against factory farming. I mean, I've had intense discussions with people where they'll be like, I'm against factory farming, and then I'll tell them like, well, um, it's like at that point you don't want to just say, well, then are all the animal products, quote unquote, that you buy from high welfare conditions? Because if they say yes, the next step in promoting veganism is of course to get them to not consume those products either. And if they say no, which, if they're being truthful, they're going to say no 99%
No.
of the time, then you're in this position of having almost like two levels of things, where you almost have to like get them to either, in their mind it seems illogical at that point to abandon all of it. So then it's like, do you just kind of like uh, address the fact that they're consuming one of those things and then incrementally kind of go to the next one? So it puts you in a very difficult situation. And one thing that I found that it can also lead to is this kind of like purity testing, where it's like, okay, so the outreacher says, do you consume only those products that come from factory farms, or I mean from high welfare conditions? And then the person could be like, oh well, do you buy clothes that only comes from not in sweatshops and things like that? It gets to a point where um, there's holding people accountable, which is awesome, and that's what we should focus on. But then there's also this kind of like selective, single pointed scrutiny that ends up leading to these like kind of like shit fights, for the lack of a better word, where people are just like, you know who's living in a less hypocritical way, or whose consumption is the absolute purest way. And then ultimately it can just devolve into discussions where the people will just appeal to this idea that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and then you basically have lost a handle on getting a person to extend moral consideration.
Yeah, I agree. So, so uh, let's say somebody wants to become an activist now, because I think I mean, having YouTube channels is great, but as I said last time, also the more you go out and speak to people, the more the better you get at convincing people. So, if you had to advise a fresh vegan activist who wants to go, what are the steps they should take, in your opinion?
So I think
You
we
can address this after. If you have any other point you were going to make earlier, please
Oh,
complete that.
no, yeah, I think I kind of rambled there a little bit, but no, that's perfectly a good time to segue into that. Like, when I had organized outreach events, what I kind of promoted people for people to do is, at the beginning, and then this may be something that people just naturally kind of gravitate towards, is if you're not comfortable doing outreach at that point, then just hold a sign or hold a screen and listen. And what oftentimes happens also is that while the people who are in the conversations are doing their outreach, more people will come to the demonstration. And sometimes when people are looking at the screens, they'll strike up a conversation with the people holding the screens. I mean, I held many demonstrations where people who held the screens weren't wearing masks and things like that would discourage people from talking to them. But they were taking kind of just more of a passive role as it pertains to conversation and outreach. But it would help people. It would help if, like, there were a few people doing outreach like actively, and then a few people like holding screens or holding signs. And then when the people holding the screens or holding the signs would get maybe a little bit uncomfortable or kind of find that they were getting a little bit in over their heads as far as like what they were comfortable with in terms of outreach, then invariably, one of the conversations that the outreachers would be in would end, and then the person could kind of like come in and provide support, like in a non-confrontational way, not just like jumping into the conversation, but maybe the person holding the screen would kind of like bow out of the conversation in a way. But as far as just starting to do outreach, I think there's no like one size fits all method, of course, and I think anybody who um, has done enough outreach is very cognizant of the fact that there's no one size fits all outreach. Um, but there are definitely strategies and tools that you can employ that help. One thing that I think really helps is,
Before you go to your strategies, I have a question
of course,
so that we can complete it before going to the strategies.
yeah.
Do you have a list of absolute don'ts that shouldn't be done during outreach?
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Yeah.
I think those pertain to things that basically reinforce the property status of animals. So like calling animals it when we're doing outreach, um, and also things like um, saying things like normal milk, for example, or regular milk, instead of like or even in terms of like vegans versus like normal people or something like that. We should never counterpose veganism um, with ideas that kind of like deride vegans or veganism as something fringe or extreme. Um, Basically, anything that kind of violates this like three ends principle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Melanie
No.
Joy, she's a PhD
No, I know her. Yeah.
psychologist, I believe. So she had, some of her recent stuff that I've seen her talk about, namely on this uh, talk that she had done with Humane Hancock gave me great concern. But as it pertains to this three ends thing, I think she was spot on. Where she basically said that with this three ends thing, that the system of carnism basically wants people to believe that the consumption of animals by humans is normal, natural, and necessary, and
Yeah.
and that these are kind of the main what the arguments for exploiting animals kind of boil down to. And also, um, similarly, the system of carnism has an interest in convincing people that, or promoting the idea that um, non that veganism or that non-exploitation, that non-participation in the system is abnormal, unnatural, and unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
Yeah. So not only does it apply the three ends to the system of carnism, but it applies the opposite of them to veganism. So this is a concept that I mean, I don't know if this is based on intelligence, but when I just hear this like shotgun to me, it's hard for me to really appreciate what all of that means without slowing down for just a second. Maybe if I were a little bit smarter, it would just like fold in my mind and click really easily. But there's really it bears repeating that this system wants to convince people not only that eating animals is normal, like, it's what we've always done, it's what everybody does, it's natural, other animals do it. These are little things I'm saying in parentheses, and necessary, aka we need to do so for optimal health or something. And
Healthy.
then that not doing those things is abnormal. Like, vegans are weird. It's unnatural. Like, this is this. I guess that's kind of speaks for itself. and then that it's unnecessary, that veganism is unnecessary, that basically, this will be in the form of appeals to futility or appeals to some kind of like lack of animal sentience, non-human animal sentience, or that we just have no good reason to do this, basically. And the extreme version of that is basically the assertion that vegans are somehow like narcissistic misanthropes who want to bring down society, basically, and why should we destroy a perfectly good society or something like that.
Yeah.
um,
Any other absolute, don'ts as far as activism is concerned?
yeah, I would say like we don't want to default to like welfareism, reducitarianism, as default approaches. We don't want to promote the idea that there's a way to like humanely farm another sentient being. We don't want to do things that promote the property status of animals, like I said. So I would
Understood.
avoid people using terminology like, "Oh, I own a pet" or something like that. I wouldn't even say pet. I don't like the insinuation that other animals like can just be like, pet kind of implies that they're an underling.
Ownership, it implies.
Ownership, yeah. And um, I would challenge the idea that one being can even own another. Like I think that that's kind of antithetical to existence. Like I don't think that there's a valid thesis that one could present whereby one being is the property of another because they have a piece of paper that says,
That's an automatic rights violation there.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
I want to answer this question real quick, and I um, appreciate the compliment here. Lewis had said, how asked how old am I? I am 36 years old, if I recall correctly, and I appreciate the compliment there. I also want to address this question. Let's see. Veganics has said, has utilitarian vegans brought on the mass popularity of non-vegans using crop deaths as a justification? I'm not sure.
I don't think crop deaths was the main reason why non-vegans became popular.
I have seen this concept gain popularity, like this concept of vegans kill animals too. There was like a Ted Nugent thing um, on the Joe Rogan podcast
Joe
where
Rogan's, yeah, yeah.
he's like, if you want to kill more animals, then be a vegan, something like that. Um, I think
I
maybe
have a feeling. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Oh no, I was sorry. I was just going to say I think maybe it's actually just a necessary byproduct of the fact that we do, as we were talking earlier, appeal to this concept of hypocrisy. Like we do state that it's logically inconsistent and irrational, and then we talk about how you don't want to kill animals. And I think one response to the carnism is always evolving, just like veganism. And one response to the crop deaths argument by non-vegans, the crop deaths though, was that we don't do so intentionally. And then now you're seeing detractors of veganism saying, well, if you're spraying pesticides on a field and you're shooting foxes and rodents in order to protect your carrots and those things, that is intentional killing. And if that this is something that happens when these things are farmed and you're buying those products, then you are intentionally contributing to it. And then I've seen a whole bunch of offshoot discussions stem from that, where people are like, well, this is what we need to do to survive, and this is kind of like our means of protecting our own survival. So it's essentially a form of self-defense. And then I've seen that then go into this idea of, are vegans only eating plant-based foods to the extent that we need to in order to survive? And I think that's kind of where that is right now, where that discussion is right now. It's vegans looking at ourselves and saying, well, am I actually, and I think that this is really important. This is like super, super important, because this question of asking ourselves, am I contributing to things that are causing unnecessary harm to animals through my plant consumption, is very, very, very important. It has implications that aren't readily evident. For example, there will be times where people will push this idea on me that that it might be okay to switch, like trolley switch to let's just say for just to keep things very simple, to let it run over X number of people
Yep.
who are participating in causing um, uh, death to non-human animals for pleasure reasons. Um, so I think, when we ask ourselves as vegans, am I causing death to non-human animals for pleasure reasons? If we're honest with ourselves, I think most of us are to some extent. Um, so I think that, when it comes to trolley problems like that, we need to be really careful. Um, you know, lest there be some kind of universe or something after this life where everything that we ever said we maintain as a rule is then switched back on us or something like that. I guess maybe that would be the concept of karma. Um, but even just for the sake of intellectual honesty, I think it's important to explore that topic.
Yeah, with respect to this particular comment, I don't think crop deaths resulted in the mass popularity of non-vegans. I would rather say, as you said, that crop deaths has evolved because the arguments from vegans also have evolved. Like as vegan arguments have become more refined, the opposition from the other side will try to indulge in any kind of. I mean, this is obviously a two coke fallacy, right? Saying you also do it, so why? I mean, how can you tell me I shouldn't do it, right? But you are right. It's very, very important to be mindful of crop deaths, and of course, uh, uh, put all your resources and technology to minimize it. Although it's unintentional, but it is absolutely incumbent upon us that we have to explore this and acknowledge it and work towards decreasing it.
Yeah, and as pertaining to those three ends that I mentioned earlier, I believe a fourth one was added, as the kind of carnist argumentation evolved, whereby um, eating animals is presented as nice. So
Nice. Okay.
it's kind of seen as this, like, no longer. Uh, it's almost like it was no longer enough to just claim that it was necessary, but it was seen as kind of this something
Beneficial or something
beneficial just for well-being, I guess, like something
for
that
health. Okay.
people could excuse, just on the grounds that it provided some enjoyment, um, and I guess maybe the opposite of that would be that veganism is not nice. And I guess, like, vegans have no sense of humor. Vegans just want to live a very, like, serious, stern, austere kind of life, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean that could be a kind of stereotyping that this is something which I think both vegans and non-vegans fall into, right? The in-group homogeneity and out-group heterogeneity. We tend to assume all meat eaters are the same. They aren't. I mean, they are really different. That's why I hate statements that say I find carnists disgusting or something like that, because you are basically homogenizing the entire outgroup here. I mean, and we also fall prey to the same things, thinking that all vegans are the same or all of us have to believe in one of the same thing. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that people are very, very different. I mean, we consider each animal an individual. So when I'm doing outreach, if I consider a meat eater to be an object to be converted, then I am not being a vegan. I also have to deal with them as an individual. I mean, carnists, or I don't even like the word carnist. People who eat meat
Yeah,
are not one group. They are not objects to be converted into people who are not meat, right?
yeah,
We
and to
need to
your
engage
point,
with them on individual.
Yeah, and to your point, we see non-vegans doing this with farmed animals, kind of like homogenizing them and erasing their individuality. And also to the point where you said you don't like the word carnist. I actually happened to meet Melanie Joy several years ago, but she said the same thing, that she doesn't like the term carnist.
No,
Yeah,
it's okay. I mean, if to refer, it's okay to refer to them as carnists. What I have a problem is assuming that they all are similar or they have the same. I'm not saying it's a pejorative term, but if you are making it a prescriptive term, saying that all carnists are like this, then that's a problem, obviously, because then you are doing exactly what you are against.
yeah, I think it's never really a beneficial thing to maintain, like, an in-group out-group thing. Like, one time, I think this was on Discord. There was a conversation between like there was a voice chat that included vegans and non-vegans. I remember somebody had thrown the word carnist around, and somebody was like, "That's what they call us." Like, you know,
Okay.
they kind of like, and it almost like further outgrouped vegans from the range of normalcy, for the lack of a better word, within that person's mind. I want to highlight this comment real quick from Lewis, where he says that um, this, especially this sentence, "No vegan ever says that they can live without harm." Um, yeah, I mean, I do see some things, especially on like Facebook and stuff, where people will sometimes post like memes. It's like, you know, um, they'll post meals and they'll be like, um, vegan, whatever, vegan burger that nobody had to die for, or something like that. And that's just not accurate. Um,
That's right.
but yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard anybody explicitly say that they can live without causing harm. So I think I agree with that sentence there. But I think we do need to be careful in sometimes almost like gloating in a way, or appearing too proud of our food, especially. Um, but yeah, this I'm kind of grappling with the sentence here. There's no intention to cause unjustified harm. Um, I guess what I think about is like, if we know that like eating a slice of vegan cheesecake after our dinner is unnecessary, or a cookie or whatever, a skillet cookie with vegan ice cream on it or something. Do we like when we buy that, if we know that there's a certain number of animal deaths, like if we could, you know how on a menu next to the calorie count, you know, or it'll say a calorie count next to the name sometimes. Like if we saw a death count for that vegan skillet cookie and ice cream, you know what I mean? If it was like, you know, this 300 mice died, or 300 grasshoppers died for the skillet cookie, and then if you add the scoop of ice cream on top of it, you know, you get a little bit of the warm cookie with the ice cream on top. It's like a nice like hot and cold mixture. You get like, you know, I don't know, 400 or 50 or something more deaths, or whatever the number might be. Then you're kind of sitting there saying like, well, is it is my enjoyment worth contributing to these additional deaths? And I think that there's no argument. Like, you know, we basically are at a point where it's very, very evident to us that that demand um, fuels supply. Now, it's not I'm not saying that that's exclusively the case. I mean, supply can also fuel demand, but we know that if we want, you know, we know that we vote with our money when we spend um, on products. So if we
Yes.
knew that that brownie and that ice cream was going to cause this many more deaths, um, I don't know if there is a symmetry breaker there when it comes to the non-vegan buying um, the non-vegan or whatever, like animal flesh or animal secretion thing, as it pertains to the harm aspect, like as it pertains to causing harm intentionally or unintentionally. Um, so basically this brings me to the point of, this is why I don't focus on harm and suffering in my advocacy so much. Because I've contended with these issues, and I've come to realize that essentially this gets into a shit fight too with people about who's perfect, who's less of a hypocrite. Um, I think that it's important to maintain focus on the fact that we didn't want to be hypocrites as it pertains to like the exploitation, the rape, you know what I mean? I don't know if YouTube is going to flag me now because I said that word, but you know what I mean? Like those things that are clear, egregious examples of things that we wouldn't accept being done to humans. And not to say that, you know, the crop related death is something that we would accept happening to humans. I'm you know, that's a whole nother topic. um, I know Vegan Gains had gotten into a little bit of that with Carson on their discussion about like, is it more ethical to eat? I don't remember the exact like calculation here, but it was like you've got, let's say, like potatoes or bread. I don't remember what the plant-based food was, but apples, I think. If you knew that that resulted in like 3 workers' deaths as compared to piece of cow flesh that may have resulted in, I don't know, one cow death or something like that. But in any case, yeah, this is why I focus on like the acts that I'm not in favor of participating in. Um, Kind of getting back to the whole, like, when I saw the footage of the cows on the dairy farm, where this was like some kind of like looked like some bestiality type stuff or something like that. And, it was disturbing on a level where I was just like, wow, I don't want to contribute to that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to contribute to that. I see the throat slitting. I don't want to contribute to that. If we keep it really simple and just kind of keep it on the base, not like talking about living without causing suffering or living without causing harm, and just um, keep it very simple in terms of just like, these are specific actions that I don't want to sign off on. You know what I mean? I think that would really help us a lot.
Yeah. So on a tangent, right? So the this the talking about suffering and talking about how much individual harm is, for me at least, it leads me down a utilitarian rabbit hole where at one point I have to agree that I have to live the most austere life possible in order to decrease harm. I mean, if I start moving itself, I'm going to cause harm. So you're right, going down this path is going to lead to very convoluted conversations, which is also why I prefer deontology, because there's a concept of like moral obligation and moral permissibility. There are some things which are permissible, which might be something like consuming dessert, right? A vegan who consumes dessert is going to cause more harm because he's consuming that dessert when not needed. But that only makes sense if you are saying that the non-vegans also don't. That makes sense if you are making in the same argument that the non-vegans do not consume dessert at all. So that's not true.
I'm
Uh,
not sure if it
so
only makes sense in that. I mean, that you might be appealing to hypocrisy there. I'm not sure, because I think that whether or not non-vegans are doing that, um, I think that there might be a responsibility that we ought to take. Like, if we know better, um, I mean, and someone could argue that it violates a deontological principle if we have a principle that we're not going to cause unnecessary death, for our pleasure. And we know that, like, the skillet cookie with the ice cream is causing unnecessary death, and our reason for consuming it is solely to derive gustatory pleasure. I mean, I
pleasure.
don't know. I think that does violate a deontological principle.
That's why I said this is a loophole discovered by deontology. Like there are certain things uh, like spending time with your family, right? It is something which that at that point you could be as well working for a charity or doing outreach, but you are spending time with your family. So that will not be a moral obligation, but it will be something which is morally permissible. Something which will morally not be permissible is exploiting, as you said, making it very simple and saying you do not do these things morally. So I'm saying it is a loophole invented by them. It's not that I agree with that,
Yeah,
right?
and I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't know that, like, if you were spending time with your family, for example, um, I don't know that that would necessarily cause the same type of harm that it would cause to, like, eat a slice of vegan cheesecake or something like that, or the skillet cookie. I think it matters,
No, I don't.
you know, the time that you're not spending doing good, so to speak, and maybe engaging in pleasurable pursuits. I think still needs to be examined in terms of, like, the downstream effects of those pleasurable
Yes.
pursuits. Now, I'm not saying that for the rest of my life I'm never going to eat something that gives me taste pleasure and that I'm not eating only for my health, but it is, I think, something that we really, really can't can't get rid of. I mean, if we want to be true to our word, and respect truth is a very stubborn thing. It doesn't go away, and it's one of those
Yes.
things that, like, it'll always come back and bite us if we're not really, really clear on this fact that, like, we really need to be really clear on the specific actions that non-vegans are engaged in, that we find problematic. Otherwise, it ends up being this endless back and forth of appeals to hypocrisy. And I don't think that any of us even want to trick anybody into going vegan. I don't think that I personally, I don't want to come off to a non-vegan when I'm doing outreach as this like beacon of moral perfection who's free from any and all hypocrisy, and I don't want to come off as somebody who always makes the most morally virtuous decisions. Um, and you know, as far as like the deontology conversation goes, like I don't even know if there's any utility, wink, wink, in calling ourselves deontologists, you know, or utilitarians and things like that. I mean, I think ultimately we can kind of like look back and analyze on the decisions that we've made and our way of thinking and say, oh, this is kind of like I'm thinking in a almost like an adjective, like I'm thinking utilitarian right now. I'm thinking deontological right now, rather than
Yes.
kind of like putting ourselves into these camps because it's just a way it's just a way to kind of let the forces of fascism ultimately just divide us. You know what I mean? Like we're in different camps and
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a nice intellectual exercise, but I don't think it should be relevant while doing outreach. While doing outreach, you should be very clear on what your messaging is.
Yeah. So if we could go back to the what you
Strategies,
had
right?
asked me,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be awesome. So we talked about things like definite no's. It was like, you know, objectifying animals, like using it, and then using terminology like I personally avoid calling non-human animals animals. Um, I will say I will use animals in a context that includes humans. Um,
Yes.
so like I could say, for example, that veganism is if somebody asked me like what is it, I could say it's a philosophy or way of life or something that contends that um, that humans should live without exploiting animals. Like I don't see I don't see it problematic to use humans in a sentence and animals in a sentence because I think that's accurate. We're saying we're not trying to impose this on other species of animals. We're saying we believe that humans should live without exploiting animals, like you know, big mushroom term, you know. So I don't think that that's problematic, but I do think it's problematic to use the word people in a way that excludes non-human animals. Um, uh, Generally speaking, like I mean, and it's hard not to do. For example, if somebody is like watching footage and they're like, "Oh, this is so sad," you know, I may say like, "Why do you think people are doing this?" or something like that. Um,
Okay.
and in that sense, I guess like you know, it's implied. I'm not saying that non-human animals are doing this, and it might be kind of awkward to say like, "Why do you think humans are doing this?" It might seem a little bit awkward. So I think there's flexibility around these concepts. Like it's not like a be all end all kind of rule, but I think that it is generally a bad idea to use otherizing kind of language, like language that casts non-human animals out as others. And um, yeah, I mean, there's also this idea that if we kind of like um, call non-human animals all the time, like I've seen it shortened as like NHA lowercase
And
s
it's it. Okay.
kind of thing. Like ultimately, like do we end up with the same kind of outgroup labeling that we were trying to avoid in the first place? I've also seen the term other used, OTHA,
Yeah, I've heard
other
that.
than
Yeah.
human animal. Um, I don't know. I'm a big fan of using language to help instill change. Like I think even in the case of like calling animals he, she, they, I think that and I've read other vegans' experiences too, where it makes non-vegans uncomfortable and it makes them have to push harder to find reasons to it arise, like it eyes other animals, like to make them its mentally as they're listening, because it's a lot easier to see yourself. You know, if we can see ourselves kind of divorced and detached from the animal kingdom, it becomes a lot easier just to appeal to things like convenience, for example, pleasure, things
Yep.
like that.
Got it.
So yeah, I think that that mostly encompasses the different like do not do's. But as far as strategies go, I think mostly we want to bear in mind this fact that carnism, non-veganism, speciesism, they do promote the ideas that veganism is unnatural, abnormal, and unnecessary. we want to be cognizant of that, um, in the sense that we don't want to sacrifice establishing rapport with people. Like, we want them to see veganism as normal. We want them to see veganism as necessary. So we want them to see veganism as normal without being pick me vegans,
Okay.
without trying to seek their approval at every turn. We want them to see veganism as necessary without basically preaching at them and making it like a very heightened, um, moral emergency based kind of like term. Like, we want to tell them it's a moral emergency, but we don't want to kind of like be very alarmist, I guess, at the same time. And we want them to see veganism as natural, in the sense that we want people to see veganism as a natural extension of consideration that we would extend to other humans. And of course, with the other ones, with the kind of like opposites to the three ends, we want to promote um, uh, the idea that veganism isn't unnatural and that it's not abnormal, that's not necessary. So while maintaining kind of all of those things in mind, we are essentially seeking to do a hostage negotiation. So we're kind of like, we're keeping these things in mind, like not being pick me's, not um, not being too focused on um, getting the necessity of veganism across to that person right then and there. But at the same time, we do want to bring it up to them that you need to take this seriously. There is a moral emergency. This is unjustified. It is logically inconsistent. It is based on irrational premises. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, we do want to convince them that veganism is necessary. But I hesitate to say that, because what I see so many people falling into in that, along that vein, is like talking about how we're going to destroy the planet and destroy ourselves and that kind of stuff. Ultimately, when people state that it's necessary, they fall into climate arguments, which is like, you're literally standing on one foot there. It's taking a very weak position. And I don't know if Vegan Pundit was heading out, but good to see you anyway, and good to see you, Rooted Sunshine. On the topic of other, I see that Lewis said other is my acronym. I do think we sometimes need to distinguish humans from other animal species without having to demoralize those other species. Yeah, well said. Well said. So I don't
Yeah,
know what your thoughts are on like any of those strategies, but please let me know
yeah,
what.
I agree. I agree with all of them. Couple of things. So when you say pick me, what I would say is don't look for validation. I mean, that is not the reason for the outreach. It is not for the other person to like you or agree with you every step of the way. I agree with that. Uh, One more thing I would like to add is that uh, we when at least in my experience of outreach, people really respond to kindness, right? They respond to, I mean, things like just remembering their names, asking them what they do, trying to connect with their culture, their religion. And if, like, I have seen this make a difference when the same person has met three different vegans on 3 different days, and each time they have come away with the feeling that, okay, regardless of whatever message has come through, I have talked to I mean, I have talked to three very kind and compassionate people, right? This is something which every vegan I have known, at least in my group, is an extremely kind person. So I think it is very important that when somebody leaves a conversation from a vegan, they should get an idea that this person is a compassionate person and a kind person. So by default, is a person worth listening to at least.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I do my best to uphold kindness as well. I think it's really important. Um, I think that there's also ways to say things using tonality that may not be the most like kind things to say. For example, if we tell a non-vegan, like, if you're still participating in these industries, you are going to be an animal abuser. I think that we can say that in a way where we're still um, we're still exuding kindness. We're still having compassion for them. um, I think there's an element of balancing this recognition that the non-vegan who you're talking to is a victim of carnism. They're a victim of the cultural societal conditioning, and having compassion for them as a victim, but at the same time holding them accountable to the extent that they do have moral agency. And the more aware that they are, of the things that they're contributing to, the more they need to hold themselves accountable. An example that I can think of is like with the skillet cookie that we had talked about earlier. So for anyone who's maybe just joining, there's a skillet cookie. It's like, a hot skillet cookie with like some vegan ice cream on top. It's all when I say vegan ice cream and skillet cookie, like, this is all plant-based is what I'm trying to say. And let's say you're at a restaurant and there's a menu, and next to the calories listed for every food item, like next to the quinoa macro bowl, 400 calories, add avocado. And then, everything that you order has a little parentheses next to it, like 80 bees were killed for this, 50 rodents, 500 grasshoppers, whatever kind of thing. I think that if that restaurant has like let's say they have a section, like, how some menus will have like a value menu section, like, the cheap, like $1 items or something like that. If they had a section that said the low impact foods, the foods that have the low, let's say instead of carbon footprint, it was called like karmic footprint or something like that, the
Okay.
effects on other animals. I think that we would pretty much be obligated to order from the low karmic footprint section. Like, I'm not saying that as a definite statement of my position, but that's, if I were to do an intuition pump, that's what I would find coming through. I'd be like, well, if I can be healthy, if I can sustain myself on these things where I'm knowingly causing less harm, I ought to. Like, it's I think that that's probably maybe a very vital step, actually, in terms of being effective and being legit and being uh like being able to authentically deliver the message that we're trying to tell non-vegans in, holding themselves accountable. We kind of have to be willing to hold ourselves accountable. And I think a lot of the harm that we cause and rationalize to ourselves as vegans is enabled by ignorance. We just don't know how much harm the vegan or, plant-based skillet cookie and plant-based ice cream on it is causing. But if we knew, like, wow, this is causing so much more harm than, or, just think about, like, if on the brownie or skillet cookie you had a choice of different ice creams, and it's like oat milk ice cream, coconut milk ice cream, and let's just say it was just those two. So I personally, if I don't knowingly consume coconut products from Thailand, because as I'm aware, like 99% of the time in Thailand, monkeys are enslaved to harvest coconuts out of trees.
I
I
see.
know that other countries may or may not engage in this, but I know that specifically in Thailand, it's worse. So I'll look for coconuts that are maybe from the Philippines. I'm not sure what other countries, maybe Malaysia, but I know that in Thailand, it's a very, very, very widespread practice there. Um, so like I said, I don't, if I'm at a store and I'm getting coconut water, and there's a brand that says it's from Thailand and a brand that says it's from Philippines, I'll buy the one that's from the Philippines. I've actually seen a pressure campaign on Whole Foods, which is like a big kind of natural grocery store in the U.S. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or heard of it, but
Yeah.
I've seen a campaign where people are addressing this idea that they use monkey slavery and that they still haven't stopped sourcing coconut products from Thailand. Hey, Carrie, good to have you here. So I think if I were at the restaurant and there was a choice between the coconut milk ice cream, of course, I also avoid coconut milk because of the saturated fat content. So coconut milk ice cream, that kind of stuff. But health stuff aside, that would make my choice alone. I'd be like, wow, this is monkey slavery ice cream, and then this is like oat ice cream. Now, that being said, of course, like, if I knew that the oat harvesting had resulted in this much more animal deaths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that could sway me. I think there would be a threshold there where I'd be like, okay, it kind of balances out with the monkey slavery aspect of it. But yeah, things to consider. I mean, like I said, I think a lot of our choices that we make, we're almost more able to enjoy our lives and able to maintain some kind of ignorant bliss, I guess, in consuming our vegan stuff. And I think the closer you can get to the source of your food, um, as long as it's plant based, the better. Like if you can grow your own food, I think it's better. I'm not talking at all about like transportation emissions and exhaust and atmospheric
Yeah.
effect, anything like that at all. I just mean from a perspective of just knowing what you're contributing to in terms of like rights violations, essentially, and like what sustains you.
Absolutely. The two offshoots of becoming vegan, right? One is obviously just becoming more kind and including more people, more individuals in your circle of kindness. The second thing is to be mindful, right, and conscious in every action that you take. So I absolutely agree with you that even when you are buying vegan products, even when you're going to vegan restaurants, it is paramount to hold yourself accountable. Like as much
Yeah,
as you expect non-vegans to, we also should do the same thing.
yeah.
I'm with you on this.
Yeah, and I've heard non-vegans actually say like um, things to the effect that like have vegans ever stopped and like looked at how much harm different plant-based foods are causing, and I think I don't see any reason why it's like I see it as a worthwhile endeavor,
Yes, yes.
to calculate those things. I want to respond to this comment from Lewis. Lewis says that the karmic footprint is really a minimize harm consequentialist thing and taking it to its logical conclusion. I'm not sure if I consider it a consequentialist thing. I'd have to. That would be maybe an interesting thing to have a discussion on. I know that Akash and I are maybe uh, less wanting to get into meta-ethical kind of things. At least I am in this specific conversation. But I do want to address what you said, that its conclusion would be. So Lewis says, taking it to its logical conclusion, killing yourself would do the most minimizing of harm. So is that really a good thing to promote? I don't think that that would be a necessary entailment, because what I'm talking about is what you would need to do in order to survive, in order to be healthy. So, like the example that I gave specifically included the skillet cookie, because that's not something, as long as somebody's calorically nourished, is something that a person would need to eat. Um, I think that you can't expect anybody to be willing to sacrifice their life for others. Um, and I think that in the case of like even a menu that would have, let's say, the quinoa macro bowl, and let's say it had like a total of, let's say, 400 deaths of various species of animals, that person could very well justify like this bowl is gonna give me this amount of protein, this amount of calories, this amount of micronutrients. I would see that as justified. I wouldn't have any problem with the argumentation behind that. Um, but the skillet cookie and stuff like that, I think that's where we really need to be asking ourselves, like, is this necessary for our survival? I think what I might be kind of promoting right now is, I haven't looked up this concept, but I've heard about this idea of nutrivorism, where basically you kind of just you eat things only for their nutritional value that you seek to derive from them. um, I've talked about this in previous live streams. I'm not sure if I mentioned it with you, Akash, but I've started tracking my food intake on an app called Chronometer, and
Chronometer, yeah.
yeah, and I basically put like everything in there, and then I see my micronutrients for the day. I see how many calories I've needed to consume, or I've consumed rather in the day, and I see how many calories I've burned more or less with different amounts of physical activity, and um, this has helped me be so aware of like, I've been limiting myself to about 1,200 to 1,300. Sometimes I go a little over, sometimes maybe a little under, but pretty much like 1,000 calorie deficit every day. And I still try to keep my protein intake at least at around 60 grams if I can help it. Sometimes I go a little bit under because I'm consuming such a low amount of calories, but I mean, other times I'll go over like 100 grams of protein. And basically, the reason I'm providing this background is that like I've been basically having to be very, very I've been having to get the most macronutrient value out of each calorie that you can imagine. So something like eating chocolate with like, cacao butter or something like that, all that saturated fat, all the calories there, it's a non-starter. Like I have restricted how many like nuts I even consume, because I'm like, wow, they're really high in fat, nuts and seeds, things like that, which I'll still consume some of, but mostly, I've been eating things like fruit, for example. It may be high in carbs, but one carb has one gram of carbohydrate has 4 calories associated with it, whereas fat has 9 calories associated with
Right.
it. So I've been trying to err on the side of fat. I believe protein also has 4. I think I might have seen some source say protein has 5 calories per gram, but I think it's 4. But yeah, I've been basically trying to keep it high protein, and like moderate carbohydrate, mostly kind of like mostly focusing on low fat and high protein, and kind of like protein has been ending up. I've been shooting for about 45 to 50% of total calories, but it's been ending up more around like 40%. So it'll kind of be like 40% protein, 50% calories from carbs, and then about 10% calories from fat. And my point in saying all this has been like, I could maybe even reach those um, macro numbers using like eating like vegan donuts, and then eating like I'm not sure where the protein would come from, but I could eat unhealthy things and still reach those macronutrient profiles. But um, my point is that like if we focus on what we actually need in terms of like what's your RDA for protein, what's your RDA for carbohydrates and vitamin C and vitamin K and iron and zinc and calcium and all this stuff, um, I think that that's probably, without driving ourselves crazy with just calorie counting and tracking things to an extreme. I think that's probably a better way to live, because we don't end up consuming things that ultimately cause ourselves suffering and that cause others more suffering than is necessary for ourselves to be sustained.
I actually agree with you because since I have gone vegan, I have not consumed dessert of any kind. I think I have not consumed junk food also of any kind.
Wow.
I and But I think that's something to do with age. I mean, maybe if I was 20 years old, it would be such a different. I mean, the taste part of it would be an important part of it, but for me, it's not. I really the gustatory pleasure does not rank high in my priorities right now. So, uh, yeah, I mean, I would prefer if people just ate what they needed and not anything more. But that's where I am right.
It kind of reminds me of the quote from Gandhi where he said, I think it's like the world has enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I mean, I
He he
really,
also he also drank goat milk. I wish he drank oat milk
uh,
instead.
yeah, yeah, drink oat milk, not goat milk. I want to address this comment from a vegan pundit says, Joel Foreman diet. I've heard of Joel Foreman. I don't know if he's associated with that, like that Engine 2 diet or something. That's what that kind of lit up in my mind, because I think I remember seeing these burgers that were like Engine 2 burgers, and I think I remember seeing Joel Furman associated with that, but I'm not sure on that. But I've also heard the caloric distribution I'm talking about, where it's like higher protein and higher carbs and lower fat, also referred to as something like a zone diet. But I'm not sure exactly if that matches up with the exact percentages that I strive for. And then there's a question from Moist Vegan, who says, "Would you save an herbivore from a carnivore trying to eat them?" Um, so like I've been outside, for example, with companion animal dogs, where they've tried to like there's a at my girlfriend's house there's this layer that a chipmunk has kind of made, like a little layer, um, and the and one of her dogs, especially, both of them kind of try to kind of like dig in there and just like kind of mess with the chipmunk, and this chipmunk has been like going into different holes and things like that to try to like pop out and be safe and then kind of like go. um, I don't want that chipmunk to be killed by those by her dogs, even if her dogs are going to eat that chipmunk. Similarly, like I've seen like a lot of people in the US will keep cats as kind of like hybrid indoor outdoor cats, so their cat will be allowed to roam outside and then also come inside. And I mean, if I were to I've seen like a cat in that kind of situation chasing after a squirrel, and I've tried to warn the squirrel when the cat was like kind of sneaking up on them. I don't want I mean, I don't want other animals to suffer those kinds of violent deaths. Maybe it's me wanting to avoid being witness to that, something like that, or I'm not sure. I mean, you could. I definitely understand that. What I'm saying about needing to eat what you need to eat for your survival could be um, extended to like cats, for example, and it could be said that well, that cat is just trying to eat however much they need to eat to survive. Um, but in those cases, I guess I'm just not sure of it. Like I'm not sure if the domesticated animal is doing what they need to do, is doing what they need to do to survive, and I guess in that case, then you could easily eliminate that condition of a theoretical hypothetical and just say, what about if I was in a forest and I saw a lion chasing after a let's not say gazelle or something. It's too stereotypical. What's a more creative example? I don't know. A beaver or something. I don't know. A platypus, something like that. Some animal like that. And if I first off, like I wouldn't want to. I guess I always think of these little things that would make the hypothetical more succinct and more more difficult to kind of like wiggle out of. So let's say that I could stop the animal, the carnivorous animal, and let's say I could even do so in a way that wouldn't hurt that animal in terms of like I'm not talking about shooting the lion or something like that with a gun. I'm talking about like if I could just if I could give like extra speed to the animal that the lion is chasing and help the animal get away. Honestly, I would, and I don't have a good reason as to why. Like,
You'll
but
have to feed the lion though, I guess.
yeah, I
Something
mean,
else.
yeah, and I think in my ideal, and I'm a little bit of an idealist, and in my ideal scenario, I would rather lions be fed by humans, and I'd rather have that be the case for all the oceans. I'd rather have uh, the oceans like have pallets and pallets of um, genetically engineered or lab grown flesh products, things like that, dropped on the oceans so that those animals um, could eat non-killing, requiring kinds of things. But yeah, I don't really have a good answer as far as like as far as why I would do that, other than just that I guess I would feel like, and of course, so this is kind of almost like I don't remember where I heard this, but there's this hypothetical about like like if every day for some reason or another, I don't, maybe I'm like adding some different conditions to this, but basically it's like you walk by a lake every day. Like part of your daily routine is that you walk by a lake, um, and then every day you kind of witness like copious numbers of babies just drowning in the lake, and it's very easy for you to just walk up to the shallow lake and just like pull a baby out who's like drowning in the lake. um, but there's so many babies drowning in the lake, and let's say that you only have like 10 minutes for whatever reason. Let's say you're working somewhere, there's a lake, kind of in the research park or industrial park or wherever, kind of like common area between all these buildings, and everybody just walks by this lake. But let's say you only get like once you've eaten your food, you get about 10 minutes where you can walk by. Maybe if you really push it, you can like eat like a protein bar while rescuing these babies and stuff. So maybe you can stretch it to like 20 or 30 minutes. But it's like, how would you basically um, be able to live in that way, I guess, like with like would you be able to just walk away knowing that you could have just spent one more second there getting another baby out, one more second getting a baby out. It kind of reminds me of that situation. um, I want to I see some other comments, but I want to just respond to Moist Vegan since we're on this question so that we can move on from it. Moist Vegan says the lion will eat other animals after anyway, so why not just kill the lion? So you would save many, many animals. The reason I wouldn't kill the lion, it's kind of this baby drowning in the lake thing is a little bit analogous to that. The reason I wouldn't save the lion is because I wouldn't want to be the one to pull the lever to kill that lion. I wouldn't be able to justify that to myself. I see it as not morally equivalent to allow harm to happen than it is to cause harm to happen. like to be a direct cause of harm. Um, when I think this way, I get very much into this like utilitarian thinking, like with the baby, pulling out the babies. Like I'd ideally want to be able to just be there all day, and I'd probably find some way to survive where maybe I didn't have to work at all, and I could just be there for 24 hours and only sleep as little as I needed to sleep and only eat as little as I needed to eat, so I could be there just pulling babies out like all day if it was so easy for me. But yeah, it's a difficult question. And then just to continue on that, Moise Begin says, why you feel that is because the herbivore is having its rights violated, and you are against rights violations. You extend basic rights to other sentient beings. Yeah, I guess
If
part
I
of the
can
issue.
respond to that,
Oh, yeah, of course.
uh, if you are interfering, then you can as well argue that the lion also is having its rights violated by you if you're stopping the lion from. I don't know how. I don't see why the other side also holds doesn't hold true.
Well, I think maybe something that might be relevant is like if the line. So Moise Vegan had said you would be saving, uh, you could save many animals. So I think the side that would be in favor of killing the lion could argue that you would have to violate just one being's rights as opposed to save many beings in the future from potentially having their rights violated. But yeah, it's a difficult question. Like I'm not really in favor of doing things that interfere with the like ecological balance in terms of like the food chain, quote unquote. That being said, like I am in favor of like I said a little while ago and that I've said before, I am in favor of doing things that could minimize the amount of killing that other animals will have to do. So I guess I am in favor of intervening in the quote unquote food chain, um, but not in favor of um, doing so in a way where we would basically have to like pull a lever. Hey Carson,
Yeah.
good to see you. So I want to address this question from Lewis before it disappears here. You should be anti-natalist, Haas, seeing how you express your views on minimizing harm. Are you anti-natalist? I I've never really been anti-natalist. I'm not like I'm not actively pro-natalist or anti-natalist. Um, I um, I think that I'm a humanitarian in some sense where I do believe in like the potential good that humans can cause in the world. And I I don't know that I'm actually um, expressing a view on minimizing harm as much as I am expressing a view on um, not directly causing um, like the best term I can think of would be rights violations, even though my views on rights are a little bit more nuanced than that. But um, I'm not anti-natalist. I'm not pro-natalist either. Like I think that what I the way I think of it is like I would never want to, like, in terms of like the killing that other animals do. If I could impose non-killing on other animals, like if I could convince a lion, and if a lion could survive without killing, I would absolutely try to do that. And that's the reason I do vegan outreach. But I wouldn't try to convince a lion not to procreate. Like um, I wouldn't want to impose a standard on humans that I wouldn't want to impose on other animals. So that's kind of like to some extent I maybe have some kind of an intuitive notion of natural rights, perhaps as it pertains to reproduction. Um, and I mean, I don't know. My partner would like to have children, and I don't see a reason that I I shouldn't, from a perspective of um, not wanting to um, cause harm, because I think that um, again, I don't think that that's exactly my position either. That like I'm just blanketly against. Um, I mean, I am against causing direct, intentional, unnecessary harm. Um, so those are the conditions on it. But I'm not sure that having another person in the world, um, another human, would increase in that. And I think also humans can do a lot of good in the world. But but I do see that there are very good reasons for adopting. Like a lot of the pro-natalist arguments could just be kind of like crushed by just saying, well, yeah, humans can do a lot of good, but why not adopt? And honestly, I do see adopting as a more ethical thing to do than procreating. But I guess like the way that I kind of can justify it to myself is that I just wouldn't want to impose that standard on other animals or other humans. So that's kind of how I think of it, I guess. Um,
I think I would agree with you. I am an antinatalist, but that's my personal position. I am not going to advocate that as something that everybody should hold, because I do not have any doubt about the fact that humans are can do amazing things. Yeah, but it's just a personal position.
yeah. Um, So I just want to address this comment by Moist Vegan. Moist Vegan says you would pull the trigger if this is cut off. So wait, no, the full comments here. Okay, you would pull the trigger in the human context though if and I think they mean axe murderer,
Axe murder.
or maybe ace murderer, like they're very proficient at murdering, was headed toward a baby and mother, and you had a gun pointing at the no axe murderer. Um, you would pull the trigger. Um, I'm not sure. Like, from a utilitarian calculus, it seems like a very intuitive thing. But um, if okay, so like if that first off, like I'd be in a lot of legal trouble if I did that. So I would definitely be thinking about could I potentially get the death penalty or something for killing someone. I wouldn't take that lightly at all. Um, that being said, I think it depends on the people too. I think there is some kind of familiarity bias there. Like, if the baby and the mother were like my partner and my baby, and I was um, defending my home, and I mean, it depends on the locale too. Like, at least in the U.S., there's some states where there's something called standard ground laws, where um, you have a lot more leeway in terms of like your ability to exert force in self-defense. But there are other places where you get basically like prosecuted to the max, potentially just for defending yourself. So I think I would think at some level that that I could be in trouble for pulling the trigger. But I guess like if this was in like a matrix or whatever, in a vacuum kind of a thing, and there weren't going to be any consequences at all, and it's just like there's no other entailments at all. I probably would pull the trigger, because I would see that um, that person as basically I don't know, because I'd have to think a lot about this, because you could easily at that after if I say I would pull the trigger, then the next thing that a person pushing from this angle would do would be to take the baby and mother, and change their species. Like in this case, it's not even implied that they're human necessarily. So I just don't know. I don't know how I could say yes in one case and not say yes to another case, without being speciesist. Um, and an entailment of adopting this would be, again, like look at what like non-vegans do. They essentially, you know it's not called murder from a legal definition, but given the fact that non-vegans are essentially murdering non-human animals, intentionally and in mass, um, if someone were to say yes to this, they would have to then go on and express some kind of a speciesist position. So I'm going to hold off on. I don't know. Maybe Moist Vegan. Maybe I can get back to you on that. But
I think
I,
it would be useful to define this in terms of self-defense, right? Uh, then you will know at what extent violence is justified in a vacuum as far as self-defense is concerned.
yeah, yeah, and in this case, I mean, it's not self defense. It's more like
No, not in this case. Yeah.
intervening with violence. And I mean, I've heard it even extrapolated to the context of Nazi Germany, and I've seen it. All right, see you later, Carrie. Good to see you. I've seen it extrapolated to the point of like Nazi Germany, for example, and like I've heard it asked like, were the Allied forces justified in intervening. So yeah, it's a really, it's a difficult kind of situation, and I think it's useful to have an idea of where you would stand on these things, but I also don't think that there's really much harm, if any, on remaining ambivalent. Like, and I don't think that it really impacts my life or the lives of others in the grand scheme of things. In reality, if I don't have a clear cut answer for it, but I think it can be useful to know where we'd stand on these things. But I don't know. A lot of times, and I'm not saying that Moist Vegan's doing this, but a lot of times these kinds of questions can be kind of like ways to kind of just like frame a person as like a horrible person kind of thing, oh, like, and like, even like in the case of if somebody had said in the fly swatting hypothetical, or somebody could say that they wouldn't have a problem with a person breeding fruit flies in order to kill them in mass, or if somebody said they wouldn't have a problem with a lady giving intentional conception to babies in order to kill them painlessly at 6 months, assuming that they enjoyed themselves, not having a problem with it. I wouldn't try to like be like, oh, this person's a horrible person because they hold this position. I'm not saying that Moist Vegan's doing that, but I don't know. I just like whenever I'm posed these kinds of questions, I always I don't know. But I am willing to confront that. And Moist Vegan says, thank you. I hope you think about it more. It's a very difficult idea. Current your stance seems inconsistent. Yeah, and I appreciate the scrutiny. And it's definitely something that I will think about. That I continue to think about. It's just I'm just not sure. And I think a lot of our answers to these questions are influenced by the fact that we are incarnate ourselves. Like we are living, breathing, and mortal, and not invincible. And I think that influences a lot of our decisions, because I think people don't want to be outcasts, because we kind of rely to some extent on society and fellow people for protection, basically, from harm. So I think that maybe a lot of people are less honest with themselves than they would be if they were invincible. If they were completely impenetrable by any kind of harmful force. And I think that that's something that we can't discount either.
Yeah.
But yeah,
In
definitely.
any hypothetical, I would lean towards the answer where there is least violence. So that is
Yeah,
my
yeah,
stance on everything.
yeah. And I mean, ultimately, that's what it boils down to. I forget who said it, but there was somebody who, I don't know if if he was like, I don't know if he was vegan, but basically this quote was something about like, all I can say is that I'm sentient life. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm sentient life I'm life which lives among other life which wants to live. And kind of like, using that as an imperfect guiding principle can be helpful. But again, yeah, I mean, like, you look at the case of somebody not putting that into effect and perpetrating violence against innocent beings. I mean, at what point do we let ourselves passively observe things? And I don't think that violence is really ever the answer. But that being said, I mean, somebody could say, what about, again, like the Allied forces and Nazi Germany, and what do you do in cases like that if diplomacy fails? But I don't know. Yeah, these are all really, really difficult topics, and I'm not sure if that seems like a dodge, but more so just, I'm a flesh and blood human myself, and I just I don't have answers to some of these questions. Like, there are certain questions I'll ask myself, how can the universe be expanding if the universe is all that is? I don't believe in multiverse theory. I don't think that there's multiple universes. I think that all that is. I think that the universe is actually infinite. I think that that's always been the case. I don't think that the universe is a certain age. I don't think that it's expanding into anything. I think that that concept. I don't subscribe to the Big Bang Theory, in other words. I mean, and these are all crazy topics that I've like warped my mind over. But my point in saying this is just like, yeah, I don't know if maybe thinking about it more would even help, but I'm certainly willing to think about these things more.
I would say we have to think about these things because I also believe. I mean, I believe that we are the only planet with life. So
Really,
it is. Yeah. Yeah.
very interesting. I mean, this is getting into a different topic here, but I'm totally
Yeah.
fine with
Yeah. It's
that.
off topic.
No, it's all good though. I mean, I think that I guess based on my view that like space is infinite, um, I would see it as a very low probability that the conditions which gave rise to life on Earth would have occurred only here.
The
Um,
conditions might have occurred many places. There is no doubt about that actually. But I think there are a series of steps that need to happen. Of course, there is no way to falsify or unfalsify this. This is
of course,
just based on current evidence uh, that if we actually assume that we are the only forms of life on Earth, it's all the more important that we figure out as much as we can before we end.
yeah. And I think if like I guess if the conditions I guess I don't see a high probability of life having arisen in other planets with the same kind of life forms we have on Earth, like in terms of like human and maybe maybe the eyes would be down here and the nose would be up here, something like that. Who knows? If there was even a nose, or if there was even a necessity to have developed uh, a physiological instrument of olfaction or sense of smell, things like that. But what I can kind of like see as being having a high probability is if the conditions of life have been um, present in other planets. Um, I don't see any reason to believe that we wouldn't have had like the same kinds of elements present on other planets. Like I think um, the elements, amino acids, minerals, whatever, all those things. I guess minerals are elements. I believe at least some of them are.
Yeah.
Um, I think that those conditions could have arisen in other planets and given rise to life. And I'm not talking about life like that's some kind of etheric concept. I'm talking very much like flesh and blood comprised of the amino acids and maybe
Carbon-based life forms.
carbon-based life
Car-
forms. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I see a high probability of that. Um, Again, like just to get back to the topic of like infinity. I mean, like I can't wrap my head around this idea that all the space that exists is becoming more, because that implies that there's a limit to what currently exists. And if there is a physical limit to what currently exists, that would imply that if you could travel fast enough, you would hit the edge of the universe. And the universe, when I say universe, I'm not talking about like something that there can be multiple iterations of. I'm saying all that there is, like all that there is. And if you hit an edge, what is that solid thing? I mean, it's like um if there's no way to go through, then there's something then there's something solid that exists on the other side of it. How far back does that go? And if it only goes to a certain point, then there's something empty behind that. And you know what I mean? Like I can't wrap my mind around this idea that the universe is expanding. I've heard people say it's like you're on the surface of a balloon and the balloon is just being inflated, so things are just getting further apart. But I can't give a shape to something that I see as infinite. And if you give a shape or a form to something, then it's no longer infinite. Um, I'm not sure how much this is. I'm getting really off topic here, but how familiar you are with Sikhism. But a lot of the things I'm talking about kind of remind me of some of the things you see in Sikhism about aspects of the infinite kind of stuff. Where I'm just kind of like paraphrase translating here, but like there's mantras in Sikhism where people will talk about aspects of the infinite. They'll be like, endless, desireless, nameless, infinite, sustainer, liberator, or other things like, immutable, invincible, without beginning, without end, true in the beginning, true now, true in the end, always true, that kind of stuff. Like just these concepts. It's like um, my point in saying this is that these things have puzzled people to an extent that, I mean, there's even like, religious thought about how unknowable these things are, and kind of like worship is almost centered around this fact that we have such a finite ability to even understand or even praise the infinite or whatever. I don't know.
I heard a very interesting attempt to explain this, like the preconditions for the Big Bang, right? Let's say the Big Bang happened, and now we are constantly expanding, and we are becoming colder and colder, right? As entropy happens, and finally we end up with an absolute cold universe where all the energy has been drained. This theory was trying to say that this end point is identical to the Big Bang, so the end point will again result in another Big Bang, so to say. So this is a cycle which keeps repeating itself. I mean,
Mm.
all these are like interesting theories, and
Yeah.
I would love if life were to be found on other planets. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if it gives you any kind of optimism about it, but I just
Some
can't.
closure, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. Well, I'm talking about what I'm about to say is that I can't imagine that. I mean, I said this kind of before, but I just imagine if the universe is so big, it's literally infinite to the point where there's no end. Like, if there's literally no end, like, just pause on that for a second. There's literally no end. If that's the case, then I see it as a near impossibility that there wouldn't be life on other planets. Um, all the aspects of like a creator and everything else aside, I mean, just scientifically speaking, if we have the substrates that have given rise to life with, like, let's just say there's even like a lightning strike that sparks some kind of uh, amino acid slush or slurry or something that's on the ground, or even if it was like some kind of mineral or some kind of carbon that like ended up reacting with the sun and whatever, like, even if that was just the most highly improbable scenario, if we're talking about an infinite universe, then you could infer that that's happened countless numbers of times. Um,
Yes, that inference is. I mean, it's a logical conclusion.
yeah, it is a big if though. But yeah,
One thing I would like to say that it is 100% possible that it can definitely happen, but I am not sure whether it is probable, whether it has actually happened. That's
yeah, yeah. I guess if the let's see, if the universe, I want to read this comment by Lewis, but if the universe is in fact infinite, I guess maybe it would be infinitely improbable as it would be probable too. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if um, I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess we know that we're here, um, as long as we're not in a simulation or something like that. Um, but anyway, yeah, it's an interesting topic. Lewis says that the observable universe may be expanding, but that's likely not the cosmos. Yeah, and as far as I understand what observable universe means, it is referring to basically however far it has to do with the speed of light, and um, how far kind of like light is able to travel such that we're able to see objects. That's my understanding. But yeah, I agree that that the cosmos, or I guess the universe at large, isn't expanding. And I mean, and just as far as the universe goes, I've seen this idea that there's like parallel universes, and basically what proponents of this I've seen argued. I'm not saying they all argue this, but what I've seen people argue or state as like a probability, if this is true, is that um, there's basically every iteration, like like every iteration of reality that could ever exist actually exists according to this theory. So basically, like, like the picture frames behind you, um, in one there's an active universe happening right now where we're talking, but one of them is tilted slightly more away or toward the other. Like, one hair on my beard was cut a little bit shorter, like a millimeter shorter, and then a little bit more short. And then there's one universe where one hair on each of our beards is cut just a little bit shorter. And then every infinite combination of those things, like every grain, like think of all the grains of sand in all the beaches and deserts. Like, there's one universe where one of those maybe just doesn't exist, or is purple, or is pink, or is a different shade. Think about the whole color spectrum. Like, that basically posits that there's an infinite number of probabilities and possibilities and that each one is basically an entire universe, which um, I I think that Lewis says something interesting here, that cosmos would include all potential universes. I'm not. I just don't. I'm not like comfortable with the use of universe in the plural. I think that that seems kind of to go counter to my view. But I think I know what Lewis is saying in that, if I think Lewis is saying, if everything is in fact infinite, that there would have to maybe be infinite possibilities, which that's kind of mind boggling. But um, I don't know. I mean, there'd have to be time and place for it, which kind of time and space for it. Possible does not equal probable. So yeah, I might be strawmanning that parallel universes or potential universes multiverse theory a little bit, and saying that all those things have to exist. Um, but I don't know if it would include all potential universes. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Lewis was saying this in reference um, to what we were saying about like life forms being probable or not probable on other planets. Um, and it says infinite space does not equal infinite matter. Um, yeah, and that's another interesting topic, because maybe I mean, it's hard for me to imagine space in the absence of matter. Um, I think my at least my understanding of space is that if it's able to hold matter, it essentially is a form of matter. Um, I can't imagine like I can't imagine. I don't know. It gets into the whole like, is light a wave or a particle kind of thing.
Well,
Um,
space is not an absence of matter. That's not what space is. I mean, it's been proven.
and I think there's types of like, there's things like dark energy and other types
Yeah.
of um, energy that I think scientists have at least tried to see as almost like, I think some of the theories looking at like quarks and other kinds of like little forms of matter that um, are kind of subatomic, is that it's almost like, rather than thinking about there being empty space between us, it's more like a liquid, almost like there's like liquid between us in a way, in space, or between objects. But yeah, it's definitely a fascinating subject. Carrie says read a book by Zukov called The
I
Dancing.
think it's Gary Zukov. This was one of the things, rite of passage while growing up, reading this book.
Okay, I haven't heard of it. I appreciate your finding it interesting, Carrie. I never know, like, when there's stuff that I talk about or post, like, I posted a like I've been trying to kind of branch out a little bit and see what people who view this channel might be also interested in. So I tried to post something about like a meditation. I was seeing if people would be interested in that, and it wasn't really very popular. I've tried posting more like I tried posting like a recipe thing as like a shorts video, and I guess that did like kind of average. But it's always interesting to me like what people find interesting in these kind of vegan conversations. And yeah, I'd love to be able to use my areas of interest to kind of help grow this channel, if that could help more people be exposed to vegan ideas. But I'm pretty sure that at least I'm always going to have more of a focus on like outreach kind of related topics, and just reaching out to non-vegans. But yeah,
Actually,
really
there's a
fascinating topics.
comment by Vegan Pandit which says veganism has never been strictly about human relationships with non-human animals. What do you think of this? I mean, if you think it's on topic.
Um, I'm 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 ambivalent. I guess more so I'm agnostic, because I would have to say, in order to know, I would have to research it. Um, so this is a descriptive statement. That's why I apply like knowing or not knowing to it, because I don't know. I don't know what the original intention was. Um, but I can say, I guess, like I can say kind of, I can describe what I see now. And I see pretty much a split as far as it is now among vegans, like as far as whether humans are included in this concept or not. Um, but and then I can also say what I think should or shouldn't happen. As far as what I think should or shouldn't happen, that's what I'm ambivalent about. I'm not sure. Um, I don't know if it's beneficial to the cause of um, liberation from basically tyranny and oppression, to include humans or non-human animals. Excuse me. My
I think
intuition.
this can segue to the vegan infighting topic, right?
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Ah,
Um,
mm.
and my intuition is that it would be beneficial for vegans to conduct ourselves in such a way where we're not violating human rights and we're not promoting human rights being violated, um, without kind of like taking the movement away from those who we need to focus on most. Um, because I think when you look at the size and scale of the oppression, um, and I think Lewis brings up a really salient point here. He says veganism is about human behavior. In other words, like veganism is not about what lions should choose to do. Um, yeah, and I think this brings up another interesting topic about moral agency, and I guess I've pondered in the past because of certain outreach discussions I have whether non-human animals actually are capable of moral agency, making having moral agency, making moral decisions. Um, like I've heard people say, like in the case of like a lion, for example, like they'll be like, well, the lion is choosing to eat the gazelle, so you need to um, go hold that lion accountable. And of course, we could say, well, the lion needs to eat the gazelle to survive. But then, the non-vegan interlocutor could be like, well, what about an animal who can live omnivorously? And then it gets into the whole thing about nutrients and specific things, and it's kind of cloudy. But I don't see any good reason to um, exclude all non-human animals blanketedly from the my conception of which beings, which animals are capable of um, practicing or exercising moral agency. Like I think especially maybe some birds, maybe some great apes are capable um, of deciding and like doing things that they believe are right or wrong. I think maybe the fact that we see like certain examples of what seems like pure altruism um, within the animal kingdom, maybe emphasize that point or like make it maybe more worthwhile to think about. But I do think that generally speaking, humans would have a higher degree of moral agency, and I think that that's why it's a good idea to focus on what Lewis said about it's like about veganism being about human behavior.
Yeah, I think I'm really not sure how much moral agency humans, I mean, non-human animals have, but
Yeah,
they all
there's definitely.
definitely deserve moral consideration from us.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the last thing you said?
They
Or they
definitely
deserve moral.
deserve moral consideration from us.
Gotcha. You know when you hear something and then you process it a little bit late, you still hear it.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened. Moist Vegan said, when cultured meat becomes the same price as traditional animal meat, do you think governments would ban animal ag for environmental reasons? I don't think so. I've even seen some pushback on the cultured meat thing because I've heard people say that cultured meat is basically cancer cells, and I think that this is an idea that could take hold among opponents to the idea of cultured meat. I mean, we know that cancer cells are basically cells that have forgotten their apoptotic ability. They're basically dividing uncontrollably. They've forgotten how to do their programmed cell death. And the way I understand it, the body kind of like concentrates and kind of like quarantines off these cells in the body to try to kind of keep them from invading, and then they kind of mimic um, our our normal cell structure, our innate cell structure, and kind of like end up tricking the body and expanding in that way. So I've seen this concept extrapolated. I don't know if there's any truth to it that these lab cultured cells are actually like that they're essentially growing tumors. I'm not sure how much truth there is to that, but nevertheless, I don't put it if that is even if that is not the case. Um, you also have to convince people that that's not the case.
I'm sure if there is any empirical evidence that this is going to be unhealthy, nobody's going to like. trials will show it. So I think once the evidence comes, it should be pretty clear.
Yeah, that's a great point. Moist Vegan says, I about the non human moral agency. I think non-humans do have some moral agency. Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of these topics, like whether we're talking about whether non-human animals have moral agency, or whether the universe is infinite, or things like that. Even the topic of whether veganism should be a topic that includes humans or non-humans. Ultimately, I don't think that they get in the way of the work that we need to do. But I think there are certain topics that do get in the way of the work that we need to do, like the things that I mentioned, basically, as far as when outreaching, like the definite, like the don't do's,
Yeah.
like objectifying other animals, or promoting like welfareism, reducitarianism, or kind of like those kinds of like maybe even like baby step kind of related things like that. Um, I think that those kinds of things can be damaging, because I don't think that it's beneficial for veganism to become diluted. Like, I don't think the message should become diluted at all. Um, I think even the realization of some people that there are people who hold a vegan ideal, and and they know how many numbers of us there are, is almost sometimes enough for people to decide to go vegan. They're like, wow, like this is radical, but I love it. I love it because it's so radically just and fair to other animals, and there's so many people doing it. Like, I think that we shouldn't be afraid to promote veganism in its real form.
Do you have a very specific criteria, especially during vegan outreach, on when to disengage?
Yeah. So like there have been conversations in the past where if somebody starts talking about like um, how do you know that those animals want to live? Like, did they come up to you and tell you that they want to live? I've disengaged before. I've been like, I'm going to respectfully end this conversation, is what I say. And I've said to people, like, I don't think that you're being intellectually honest with me at this point anymore. Um, I've said stuff like that, and
Okay.
I think that there is, there's only so much time that we have now. If you're in a really small town and there's only like one person walking by every half an hour, and the one person that walked by is saying that to you, maybe like humor them a little bit longer. But again, at that point, then it would beg the question that maybe you should like pack up your demonstration and go somewhere else, you know what I mean, and do something else with your time. But especially if you're in like a busy area where there's lots of potential people for you to talk to, and people could have the reactions where people see the footage or see a sign or make a connection in their mind, and completely end up in that moment being like, thank you for opening my eyes. I really had never considered this way, and I can't believe I haven't considered this. I don't know why I haven't considered this. I never wondered why I never wondered about this. Thank you so much. You've changed my life. What can I do to help you? I know that I won't be able to really be out here with you immediately, but once I make these changes in my life, what point do I need to get to come and help you with this? Because this is really important. Thank you for opening my eyes to this injustice. All that stuff. There's millions of people potentially out there who are
Yeah.
at that point, who just need to have their eyes open just a little bit. So I think we don't really want to waste our time with people who are being intellectually dishonest, or who clearly want to detract from veganism. That being said, I mean, um, I think that there can be some value if there's a conversation where you basically just like kind of like it's like if it's like t-ball practice or something like that, or just like um, playing like very very like an easy version of baseball or something, where you're able to just knock every argument out of the park, and and have, if a person seems to have a combination of like willingness to listen and change and ask you thoughtful questions, um, even if they're being a little bit antagonistic, or a little bit immature acting, or intellectually dishonest, or whatever,
The
I think it can
bad
be good.
faith arguers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it can be good to address those bad faith arguments. Like if you're really feeling like kind of like in your element, and you're able to just like boom, 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 kind of just knock those down, I think it can be good. It can make really good content. And what it can also do is it can show, that content can then show non-vegans like, wow, this is me. Like these are all my arguments. And this is how I look when I say, hey, plants feel pain, or something like that. Or this is how I look when I say, why don't you go and tell a lion to go vegan, or something like that.
Got it. Fine. So, is do you think there is right? As I said, it's so important to have empathy while and compassion while having outreach. Do you think there's a point where there can be too much empathy? Why I'm saying this because literally the second person I spoke to on my first ever outreach was a guy who was not vegan, but his dog had been kidnapped. German Shepherd, right? And it had been kidnapped a few months ago. Every day he comes and sits there looking for the dog, and that I spent so much time with him. Uh, Not only that day, but so many days. So I think that was a problem because it wasn't actually. I knew that he had no chance of getting his dog back, but I still spent so much time with him. So, is there a thing such as too much empathy? I mean, when do you think that okay, this is time to move on from one person to the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just comes down to viewing time as a resource and kind of knowing that you can potentially make a much bigger impact when talking to somebody who maybe you're delivering the message to for the first time. You know what I mean about veganism, or even in the case of like I guess so. If I understand correctly, somebody's dog companion had gone missing, and they were looking for them kind of endlessly. Um, yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I guess in that sense, you're kind of wanting to be more of an emotional support person for that individual, more so than maybe trying to maybe impact like social change kind of thing, that much in that case.
So, because
Hey,
what happened
Akash, sorry,
was,
would you be willing
okay,
to, if we could maybe take like just a few minute of a couple minute, just a bathroom break? Would you be up for that? If
absolutely,
we're going
absolutely.
to keep going. Okay, great. Um, One thing I'll do then in the meantime, let's see. I'm going to, let's see. Okay. I'll just play a little video of an animal sanctuary in the meantime, and then I'll be right back. And I'll take us off the stream for now.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does this have to? Oh, it has to upload first. Okay. Well, it'll be uploading in just a sec, um, but yeah, I appreciate everybody watching, and I think when Akash and I talked for the first time, we were like, wow, there's so much other stuff that we can talk about. So I'd love to keep going, but I've just been drinking a lot of water here. So I'll be back in just a minute, and this is going to be a video it's posted on my channel actually. It's just a video of an animal sanctuary. So post that in just a minute here. I didn't realize I would have to upload and process this first. But other stuff that I think we've talked about a lot of the stuff that we had planned to talk about, from like the pickled fetus thing to the fruit fly hypothetical, slaughterhouse workers, and kind of the issues pertaining to human rights. We've talked about the psychological,
Outreach. Yeah.
sociological factors, things like that. Strategies to overcome resistance, that kind of stuff. Maybe just to that degree, it would be a little good to talk about, and maybe a little bit about the infighting aspect as well. All right, so this clip
Sure.
is ready, I believe. So I'll go ahead and put this on. I'll go ahead and remove us from the stream for now, and then we'll be back in just a couple minutes. And let me go ahead and put a banner on. We will be resuming shortly. Thank you for your patience. Okay. There's that. And then Thanks everybody for your patience. I think there's Akash. Okay, great. Um, I don't know if anybody if anybody has seen that video before, but that place is really fun to visit, and it's always great to be able to see animals who are like not in those conditions, and to be able to meet ones who are rescued from those conditions. Um, so yeah, we were talking about the I guess what we wanted to kind of like talk about from here on, and I think it would be good to just continue to talk a little bit about the strategy element as it pertains
Yeah.
to like if you have a person who is very open to hearing more about veganism um, and seems to express like genuine intellectual curiosity. Something that I find can be really helpful is to just like you want to continue to obviously exude compassion and understanding and all that stuff the whole time, but maybe even to a slightly greater extent, in a way where you're not like what I try to avoid is presenting veganism like a club that they're going to join. Like let's say somebody's really interested in it and things like that. Like I try to avoid getting into this thinking where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this person might just be my new best friend and my new best activist buddy, and like I need to kind of like put on a really good image for veganism and for this idea and things like that. Um, what I like to go more in the direction of is like challenging um, challenging them from a non-vegan perspective. So what I mean by that is if somebody seems really open to what I'm saying, I'm almost, I don't want to say suspicious, but I kind of maybe act a little bit suspicious and just say like, so what about plants though? Like, don't plants feel pain? And um, and I see how they would respond to these kind of arguments that we hear all the time from non-vegans, because um, essentially um, if somebody's going vegan, then they're going to encounter hate. They're going to encounter all sorts of stuff. So I better, I'd rather they hear it from me than hear it from a non-vegan. So I'll ask them those kinds of things. I think that's really critical too.
I think that's a great point you brought up about challenging them from a non-vegan perspective, because especially in India, right, where I live, people are really agreeable. They really want to reach out. So if you stand there with a sign, they'll come, they'll want to talk to you, they'll agree with everything you say, and then they'll thank you and go off. Where then you are not sure what you have done in that particular situation, because there has been no pushback at all. They're just listening, saying thank you, say you are doing a great job, and they leave.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many outreach conversations I've had where that's all that happens. And I get it on video and everything, but then I look back on it and I'm like, this wasn't a conversation, this was just me verbally leafleting essentially.
Yeah.
And then, they walk away. I'm like, this is just bad content. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, I totally, I think that there needs to be a little bit of a push pull going on there. I want to, so this comment from Moist Vegan. Moist Vegan says you need a certain amount of consumers to change, but not 100%. So pathways to get enough people to be vegan to elect a pro-animal rights party to pass laws. This will end animal ag. It certainly could. I can also see things working in such a way where um, I don't know. I don't. It's I can see things, I guess, working in such a way where if veganism becomes essentially so normalized to the extent that um, I mean, I think eventually it's a given that it will become normalized if and when we achieve what we want to achieve. That we don't even need to use the word vegan anymore. We don't need um, to really wonder about it anymore. Really, it'll probably be something used a lot less eventually. Um, Similarly to how people don't say that they're abolitionists when it pertains to human slavery in the United States anymore. It's just a given. Um, so I don't know if maybe if veganism um, might spread in a fashion where a pro animal rights party doesn't need to be involved at all. Something that um, comes to mind right now is the debug your brain um, video about how change happens, and he's talking about in that video like Change is kind of in many ways conventionally thought to originate from the center, but I guess what kind of can happen sometimes it can start at the periphery and things like that. So I think maybe the question like this might be something that he might have maybe a better answer for. Um, Carrie said 20% change, was it, to get momentum? I mean, I've seen different statistics. I've seen it go as low as 3.5%, but you got to ask yourself. I mean, what percentage of the population is vegan? Or maybe even before that, what percentage of the population says they're vegan? What percent of the population actually is vegan out of those? And then what percentage of that population is actually advocating at all? So I think that the number of people who say that they're vegan and the number of people who are actually vegan, that discrepancy is much larger than the discrepancy between the number of people who are actually vegan and the number of people who are advocating for veganism. In other words, I think the quote unquote real vegans are the people who are, or the people who are for animal rights, and or concerned with the whatever topic definition of veganism I guess we're using here. I think that those people are more than likely to be involved. um, Carrie, I would say that you're probably doing activism without knowing it. Like, I my definition of activism is very broad. So I think that if you have a friend who sees you eating like some kind of vegan food and they say, um, oh, like I didn't know that you ate. Let's say you're eating like a burger and it happens to be a vegan burger, and they say, oh, I didn't know you ate burgers, and you can be like, oh, it's vegan. Like this place down the street has really good vegan burgers or something like that. I mean, I think that that's essentially that's activism. It may not be proactive activism. Like it may be more proactive if you went on to say something after that about the fact that eating animals is unnecessary anymore or something like that. That would be better potentially. It could be more alienating depending on your relationship with that person. But I don't think that that not doing activism makes you not vegan. I'm just saying that I think that the number of people who are actually vegan are are generally going to be promoting veganism in higher numbers as compared to the number of people like that discrepancy actually vegan and promoting veganism. There's going to be less people who are vegan and not promoting veganism than there are um, as the difference between people who say that they're vegan and are actually plant-based or something like that and not actually vegan.
If I may add something,
Yeah.
I was reading a speech by, I think, Martin Luther King Jr. In some other context, but he references two things. He distinguishes between negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is just an absence of tension, an absence of disorder. But positive peace is active looking out for justice, right? So you don't have. I mean, anybody who's a vegan will actually be looking for the positive side of it. So you might not be an activist. You don't have to go out and like talk to random people, but generally where you are, even in YouTube comments or with your family or with your friends, if you are actively promoting veganism and spreading information, then you are an activist. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. And yeah, I remember this quote from Dr. King. It's like um, the I don't know if this was from the letter from Birmingham jail, but he said basically it's like
It was a letter. Yes, it was a letter.
okay, yeah, it's like something about like we ought to fight for a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, as opposed to the absence of tension. Yeah, I mean, like if you walk into some restaurant where everybody in there is eating animals, it may appear very peaceful, but there's the presence of injustice there, and as a vegan, I think any of us would seek to disrupt that to some degree. Yeah. So yeah, Carrie, I mean, that's activism. And I mean, like, you know, it's, I don't see it as having any utility, for the lack of a better word, um, to tell people that they're not doing activism. Um, I do see utility in telling people that they're not doing activism correctly if they're promoting things like welfareism, but that's another topic for another day, literally. Um, but yeah, I think another thing that that letter from Birmingham jail talks about is that, um, I'm paraphrasing here, but he had basically said that it's not like the Klan member who's the biggest, um, who's the biggest oppositional force to the liberation that he was seeking, but it
It was
was
the
the white,
moderates, right?
yeah, the white moderates, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the people who say, I agree with you and your cause, but I disagree with the way you're going about doing it. You know, it's when we see vegans calling other vegans too extreme for doing things that aren't extreme, and causing vegans to basically bend a knee and apologize where no apology is due. I think that actually stands in the way more of the substantive change and the radical perspective shift in not viewing animals as property anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think as far as, like, you know, people's resistance to that um, in outreach, something that we can think about is when you're talking to somebody and they're resisting slightly, you could ask you could ask something in the form of a question that you may have asked more in the form of kind of a tongue-in-cheek question if they had been on board. For example, like, the plants feel pain though, don't they? Kind of thing, for somebody who's totally on board. You could
Yeah.
ask maybe more as a speculative, more open-ended question and kind of see where someone stands. I think a lot of the issues that we have are that we're not clear on people's stances. I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTuber Ask Yourself, but he's
Yeah.
a vegan who he engages in a lot of different debates and things like that. And I think he's the originator of the name the trait argument.
Name the trade. Yeah.
He emphasizes a lot that it's incredibly important to be very clear on the position that that your opponent, essentially, or that the person you're discussing with um, has, because if you're not clear on their position, um, it can lead to all sorts of issues. You know, you can end up basically talking past each other, and I'm done kind of paraphrasing his thing right now, but just more an analysis of it. Like, you know, you can end up talking past each other, you can end up arguing against what they're not even promoting, and you can end up making them feel strawmanned, and then it can just end up raising the kind of emotional quotient of the whole discussion. So it's really important, like in the case where somebody is kind of vague about their answers, to just ask them kind of open-ended questions. And in doing these things, of course, it's very important to not ask accusatory sounding questions, like, you know, um, and questions that could have kind of like hyperbolic different interpretations and conclusions, for example. So for example, like, if we were to ask um, about even like um, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, if somebody says, "Oh, I don't know, like, you know, we've been doing this for a long time," or something like that, it's best to address what they're actually saying first and foremost. As a good listener, it's best to address, like, you know, just because, and say, just because we're doing something for a long time doesn't mean that we should keep doing it, etc. And ask that as a question, a very simple yes or no question. Um, that's better in the form of a question, I think, than saying, just
Yeah.
because we've been doing something for a long time doesn't mean we should keep doing it. I think that's better than saying, I think it's even better than saying we've been doing a lot of things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that those things are
Actually,
right.
you can also ask them: are there things which people have done for a long time which they now know it's
Yes,
not, they are not
yes, yeah,
supposed to do? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, keeping that as a yes or no question is really good. Or even asking somebody um, a yes or no question, which is kind of a rhetorical yes or no question. We could say, can you think of any examples that in the past where cultures have done things that are no longer practiced or that are widely accepted as immoral now? It's important not to appeal to popularity, of course, when doing that, and to not get get yourself into making a positive claim that, like, society now is more moral or something like that. But maybe keeping it vague in that sense and just being like, can you think of societal progress? Like, can you think of examples of societal progress, or can you think of any examples? And just letting that person bring something to the conversation that they can kind of use to build their own position in their mind. Because we don't want to feed people ideas and then get them to just accept it without being a participant in the conversation. So a lot of this is like a matter of getting those thoughts to come and go without forcing them in, and kind of causing people. We want people to kind of, for lack of a better, organically come to conclusions on their own.
Yeah, when you talked about the animal abuser thing, right? So some of our posters start with, "Do you support animal abuse?" or something, and in the end, once they have agreed that consuming dairy or meat is a form of animal abuse, most of this conversation have ended with they themselves telling me that yes, I have been indulging in animal abuse, and looks like I will still do it, but at least now I will think about it next time I'm doing it, something like that. So I agree with you absolutely on this. Everything, the more it comes from them, the better the conversation will be.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point with what you said a second ago. Um, with regard to people understanding what they're doing and participating in it, in a sense, I think we would both agree that intention is important, and that awareness really matters in terms of being aware of the effects of what you're doing. Like with regard to the example I was talking about with the menu, for example. Like, let's say this menu is actually at a fully plant-based restaurant, and there's next to the calorie breakdown of every food, there's also a breakdown of the number of non-human animal deaths, or the extent to which it caused harm in among non-human animals. If we're aware of that, then, and we choose to like, let's say we just continue, we neglect that knowledge that we have and continue buying whatever we want from that restaurant just because it's plant-based, regardless of its downstream impact. In a sense, like, then I think we are starting to engage in immoral behavior. And I think that when sorry. uh, I just saw a very interesting comment.
I saw that.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think what we know really matters, and I think in a sense we're kind of rendering people immoral in a way, because if somebody hadn't confronted these things, then they weren't really doing anything immoral. You know what I mean? If they weren't
Yes.
aware. But once they're aware and then they're making those choices, like, I always think about this. Like, I really think about, if I have a conversation just with some lady who walks by, she's never thought about this stuff, and I ask her all these questions, and she just says stuff where, as she's talking about it, she is becoming aware herself that she holds these positions. Like, I see her thinking about it, and she's like, huh, no, I guess I do value my taste sensation over the life of other animals. And, or like, I am fine with these animals being impregnated because I prefer the taste of cow milk in my cereal as opposed to oat milk. And let's say that she's very cognizant and accepting of the fact, like, she doesn't try to pull these like appeals to hypocrisy and say, well, oat milk causes damage too, and things like that. Let's say she's very, very aware of all those things and very clear on it, and simply says, like, nothing can replace cow's milk in my mind, and I'm very happy to keep drinking it. It's what we've always done. I don't care if it's wrong. It's what I'll continue to do. And screw the animals. They're here for us, and their property, etc. Like, if that person had never espoused those kinds of views before, never really thought of it before, and as a result of my conversation, which you can kind of tell when somebody's thinking about things for the first time, they might even tell you, and they come to those conclusions, and then I'm watching that person walking away, it's essentially like, I'm like, what have I done? Like, I've created a monster. You know what I mean? Just in terms of, like, I'm like, is this person going to lose all their friends now? Because, like, you know what I mean? Like, you really kind of wonder a little bit, like, are they going to be really tormented by what they realized about themselves and just end up being like an irritable mess to everybody in their lives, you know?
I've known people to which this has happened. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, cognitive dissonance is very, very painful. Obviously,
yes,
what we hope happens is that they change their behavior to be or their values. If their behavior, like if they're behaving in such a way where they're hurting animals, we want them to change their behaviors if they're truly like kind of quote unquote good people, if they truly are against commodification, exploitation, um, objectification of other animals and oppressing them. But a lot of times, what can happen is their views on it aren't really clear to them, to themselves, and then their views end up changing to conform to the behavior, and that's like the worst outcome you could ever get.
that's right.
But yeah, I don't think consuming human breast milk is unethical. I think it's probably it's the only mammalian milk that humans can actually drink, which could be vegan because it would be given, as long as it's given consensually. I don't see an issue with it. From a consenting adult woman, I don't see an issue with it. Yeah, I think I don't know what more we could kind of talk about in terms of strategies and outreach kind of stuff.
Strategies. Yeah, yeah,
I'm really curious about kind of like how everywhere has a different kind of social climate. You really have to be somewhere to really sense it.
yeah.
Um, and I think, of course, India being a relatively huge place has probably a different social climate depending on where you are. Um, one thing that I'm kind of curious about, and maybe would be useful to kind of share my perceptions on this, is like I've been involved in um, basically going to different social cause related marches um, with a group of vegans with the intention of kind of like, obviously supporting what they're doing, but at the same time, seeing if we can kind of build any bridges.
Okay.
So something that I've done, for example, is I've gone to a feminist rally, and and I had a sign, for example, that said "Stop drinking." It was a stop sign, and then I got like a stop sign on a thing, like maybe for like a crosswalk guard or something like that for them to use, and then I put a sticker on it that said "Eating animals." It's something that people actually do in the U.S. where they'll buy a red sticker that says "Eating
Yeah.
animals," and then they'll stick it under a stop sign, so it says like "Stop eating animals." So I made a stop sign like that, and um, and I had I said it said "Stop drinking cow's milk," I think is what it said, and um, I had a lot of conversations come up, and I swear, like the people at that feminist rally were those non-vegans were the most receptive non-vegans I've ever talked to, like on the whole at an event. I was like, I was just talking to them about how do you feel about getting these females pregnant? Their their reproductive systems are being exploited and so on. And it really clicked in such a way where like they saw it as an issue. They saw it as a social justice issue. I think it's really important for veganism to be recognized as a social justice issue. Um, and I think that's basically epitomized by the use of like they them or he she pronouns for non-human animals. Um, I think when you use those words, you immediately bring it into the realm of social justice, but you do so in such an innocuous way where it's not overtly offensive. It's not something that causes somebody to recoil and say, "Oh, these vegans are crazy," and like, what are they saying? Because they'll ask themselves, like, "Wait, why am I so triggered by the use of a pronoun for, like, that respects the personhood of these animals?" It's brilliant, um, and we ought to do it. It's the right thing to do, and it's a smart thing to do. Um, but I have had a lot of trouble going to events where the cause has been like climate justice, environmental justice, that kind of stuff, like those kinds of marches. I found people there, their excuses against veganism are just locked and loaded. They're just ready. They're ready to kind of like philosophically, verbally brawl with the idea of veganism and animal rights. Um, they have so many arguments just at the ready, um, and are quite antagonistic toward veganism. You'll see a lot of sentiment at those places for reducitarianism, like, oh, we should be eating more local meat. We should be eating less. They'll say we should be eating less red meat and stuff like that. Um, but a lot of people have these kind of kooky ideas, like, oh, we should be farming more chickens because they have less of a, it's the most sustainable meat to be farming and stuff like that. They're not, generally on the whole, they're not concerned with um, animal rights and things like that. And yeah, Carrie, I'm not in favor of hijacking people's events, but yeah, I'm more in favor of building bridges and things like that. And I think that it's really brilliant to be able to find um, events where people of conscience are, where their conscience has told them this is a matter of justice, whether it's um, egalitarianism between the sexes, or whether it's like climate justice or other types of events. Comes to mind are like LGBTQIA plus type events, and things like that. I think can be very beneficial. I want to just read this comment from Carrie. Carrie has said, uh, um, she says that she says, think, like, would you like bovine breast milk or bean water in your coffee? Yeah, I think that's pretty forward. I think if you've had good luck with it, I would continue doing. A lot of this comes down to kind of personal style and you best how you best do things. I mean, some people are a lot better at protesting type stuff and chanting type stuff, and do that in a way that I doing speak outs in public and things like that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing so myself. Some people are really good at doing podcasts and live streams type stuff where I'm not as good as doing it. Like I sometimes derail myself. I say a lot of ums and ahs, that kind of stuff, but I try. And some people aren't as good at doing outreach type conversations where maybe they're a little rough around the edges and don't jive as well with people. But I think it's important for us all to use our strengths. So yeah, and Carrie
So you
also,
were saying that you were asking me about the social milieu here, right?
yeah,
And your personal story is that it was far easier in a feminist rally than in the other ones. Was that your observation?
that's just an example. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how the um, feminist movement is there in terms of its strength and what it's dealing with, and I'm not sure what the environmental movement is dealing with there. I mean, I think depending on where you are, also, um, I think it becomes very very important. I mean, you'll hear about places like my parents are from Turkey, for example, and in Turkey, the feminist movement is facing a way different situation than the feminist movement is in the U.S., for example. Um, so I think that might also impact kind of um, the threshold at which people feel a need to get involved in an issue. Um, and of course, when I say that might impact, I'm not only talking about the degree to which women are oppressed and people feel that they should be advocated for, but also something might impact it is the degree to which people feel safe coming out with certain positions. That's of course very important too. Like I can imagine there being a society where people are forced to conform to a specific order where they feel at the threat of, they feel like they're potentially subject to state violence for even handing out leaflets and things like that. So about veganism or any other issue that's kind of like um, seen as counterculture. But yeah, I'd love to hear your kind of take on how things are there in terms of like the average kind of perception of veganism, and in your experience, what you felt kind of has landed the best with people in terms of like um, perspectives from which you present arguments are kind of like ideas that you allude to. Like, what are some things that I know you mentioned, like that when you talk against animal abuse, a lot of people seem to be almost as a default kind of like, yes, yes, you're right, you're right, you're right, and then kind of walk away. I see that as pretty brilliant because um, then you can kind of very gently go toward the direction of holding people accountable,
Yes.
without just overtly saying like, how much of this do you consume, how much of that do you consume, just maybe making it more blanketedly like, what do you know about the dairy industry, for example, just asking kind of open-ended questions and letting people draw their own conclusions. I think
Right.
it's always best if we speak in terms of the industry and the practices rather than the individual, and never forget that they're complicit in those things, and never fail to remind them if necessary. But it's always good to speak in terms of the institutional practices, I think, to keep it as a social justice issue and not
Yeah.
this like hypocrisy shit fight kind of thing.
Yeah. So actually, India, at least where I live, it's the milieu is entirely different, right? So there is a lot of women's rights advocacy going on here, but the focus is slightly different because we are still like 30th, I think, was the World Menstrual Hygiene Day, right? So one of my vegan friends had called me for an outreach promoting more environmentally friendly menstrual products, right? So I was out there, and mostly I was talking to women because they were the activists there, and almost 80, not 80%, more than 90% of them were absolutely open to the concept of veganism and were very willing to listen to me, right? But okay, I don't know how to make this sound appropriate, but all studies have shown that women respond better to veganism. I mean, there are literally studies which show that when you do vegan outreach, women are more likely to respond and go vegan than men.
I don't
So,
doubt it. I haven't seen
yeah,
any
yeah.
specific studies about it, but I don't doubt it for a second.
No, no, there are studies. And so the question is, when you went to the feminist movement, did you find that people were more willing to become vegan because there were more women there? Do you think that was a factor in that?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not able to remember exactly. The breakdown in terms of demographics, but I know that I have talked to a fair enough number of women and a fair enough number of men when doing street outreach, that I can't say that I've seen um, any kind of trend one way or another. Sometimes I have really good luck talking with men. Sometimes I don't know if it's luck or whatever, but yeah, I can't say that I've noticed something one way or another. Um,
What I can
Maybe,
definitely say is that in India, they don't consider vegans as somebody radical or somebody who needs to be looked at or this thing. We usually need to do is go to the nearby police station, tell them we'll be doing this here, and they are always fine with it. I mean, we are not yet at a place where this is considered to be a problem or anything,
let me
right?
ask you
I
this.
think, yeah,
Something that gives me a little bit of concern. Sorry to pause you there. Something that gives me a
yeah.
little bit of concern is like, excuse me, when veganism is kind of like normal and accepted within a society. So imagine there's a society where veganism is just like a fixture within the society. It's normal. Excuse me. Sometimes I found that it can be more problematic in a way where if I'm advocating for veganism, let's say in more of a neighborhood that's kind of like let's say it's like kind of a hipster neighborhood or something. There's a lot of like young people there, things like that. They're used to having a lot of friends who are quote unquote vegan, and I bring up veganism. It's kind of like they're like, oh, like it's almost like he's one of the extreme vegans because I'm surrounded by a lot of vegans and a lot of people who profess to be vegan, but they'll eat like more than likely. I rarely get into a point where I'm like asking people about this stuff, like where I'm like, if somebody's like, oh, vegan, oh, you're promoting veganism, oh, I have a vegan friend. More than likely, I don't want to say more than likely, but in many cases, those vegan friends, when I've come down to asking about veganism or like telling them about veganism, that person will voluntarily then tell me, oh, my friend is vegan, but they eat honey and eggs sometimes or stuff like that. So they'll say like, um, when veganism has become very normalized, and kind of just like assimilated itself into a culture, um, people will almost like it'll be harder to get the moral emergency aspect of it across, because people will say like, oh, vegan, like, yeah, I enjoy a lot of different vegan meals, or like, we eat vegan a few times a week or something like that. And it's just like, they're like, yeah, I'm familiar with the issues, and we do our best to buy humanely raised, like high welfare animal flesh, or they don't say that, but that's what they say that they buy. And it becomes harder at that point to get the moral imperative across. um,
Yeah.
and they seem
So
to be
I
happy
just to
because they know about, let me just finish this point if I may. They
Yeah.
seem happy to know about all the relevant issues in terms of the cruelty and things like that, and it's almost like they found a point where they're just happy. They're like, this is how much I can do, you know what I mean? So it doesn't even really help to bring out the fact that they're being moral hypocrites, because they've already accepted a certain degree of it.
Yeah. So just to clarify, in India, veganism is not normal, considered normal. What I meant was it has not risen to the extent where anybody has taken notice of it.
Hmm. Okay.
That is what I meant. So the number of vegans is a very, very, very small percentage of the population, and our message is insanely radical because most of our targets are vegetarians, which is the most difficult group to convert as far as I have seen, right? So for them, veganism is an entirely radical idea. So what I did not mean that it was normal. I meant that it is such a small thing that it has not risen to an extent where people are even noticing it,
Hmm.
where industries are taking a note of it. It's an area of that was my area of concern, not that it is so widespread that it's normalized.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, that people who have gone vegetarian are often the hardest people to talk to and convert, so to speak, or convince about the need to be vegan, because they think that they already are animal defenders in a sense, and that they're already
Yes.
doing enough. And a lot of times, I'll hear people who are vegetarians say, "Why don't you go and talk to somebody who's eating animals?" And they'll say, "I'm already vegetarian." And it's very clear that a lot of people get to that point and then have no intention to look into the issues any further, which is really quite sad. And I'm not sure how to spark that curiosity or interest within people to want to investigate that further, and to follow up on those dark, sticky areas within their minds, which they haven't explored.
So one thing I've noticed is the most successful activists in India, right? Like there's one Arvind, the animal activist, also, I mean, from India at least. So what they are doing more and more is they are going and giving lectures in medical colleges, right? Because we as a culture we worship doctors. We will listen as far as, I mean, not right now, but at least even a few years back, doctors were considered to be god because they had control over your life and death. And now it's more of a business. But educating the right people also is important, because if you convince one doctor or a potential doctor to become vegan, the amount of utility that you will get is immeasurable, because people just listen to doctors like that. I think the same thing with women, right? If I had to choose between doing outreach for a woman versus a man, I would choose the woman, because she has more influence on her children, on her brothers, sisters, families. At least in India, many families, they will listen to their mothers with regards to these kind of things, right? they
Yeah, I've
they,
heard it
they do
stated in
listen.
the
Yeah.
in the U.S. too, that kind of like women rule the marketplace in terms of influencing consumer decisions. One thing that I want
Yeah.
to bring up is with regard to the impact of a doctor going vegan. Something that it's important to consider is how that doctor is making their veganism known, and
Yes.
if and how they are advocating or educating about veganism. Like, are they saying, are they using the word veganism and educating people about it, or are they just promoting a plant-based diet and and trying to appeal to people to go vegan, quote unquote, on health based grounds alone. So, I mean, I have no problem with the doctor saying you should eat like more plant based foods as opposed to animal based foods. And I have no problem with them even appealing to potential health benefits that a person could expect to see. But if that's the only thing that they're doing ever in their lives, like I see that as problematic because it's essentially it's almost like kind of like a bait and switch, and people
Yes.
are kind of like very aware when somebody is like selling something with different intentions. And I've seen people question studies and advice from, and I guess this is another kind of like um, relevant topic that's maybe a little problematic for us, is that if a doctor is quote unquote an ethical vegan, a lot of people maybe at times won't trust their advice because they'll say that they have an inherent bias. So it kind of forces that doctor to stick to very health related advice only. But of course, like we know that it's not, on principle, it's not a good thing to tell people that they shouldn't go around punching pigs because their fists could get bruised. You know what I mean? Like um, appealing to the selfish desires of someone may not be the best idea. Um, so that's something to
So what
consider.
I meant was doctors not in their professional practice, right? It is just that once they know the statistics, they know the studies, they can interpret it. Even when I'm doing outreach, when I tell someone, okay, I am a doctor, so at least I have a little more grounding in this than you have, and I am convinced that it is healthy. That makes for a slightly more powerful argument. It's a sort of appeal to authority, but valid in this case.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen a lot of people also, at least in the U.S., I've seen people appeal to the idea that vegan or that doctors get very little health and nutrition education,
Yeah.
which at least like in the U.S., I believe doctors just take maybe one class on like it's called like human nutrition or something like that. Um,
No, very less. I don't remember learning anything about the advantages of one plant based or this thing. Not in my education.
I think what I've heard, at least maybe it's different country to country, but from what I've heard, at least I think all doctors at least receive some kind of education um, on nutrition in terms of like the impact of
Yeah,
um,
on cardiovascular
copper,
cancer,
calcium,
all those
whatever,
things.
how they impact this and that body system, that kind of stuff. But I think case in point, regardless of how much nutrition information a doctor receives. Unless they're studying like dietetics and or nutrition, like unless they're becoming a dietitian or a nutritionist, their degree of education that they're going to get in terms of nutrition is just a lot less, because you want people to really spend time learning about what they're really specializing in, which I understand.
That's
But
right.
I guess
It's a great point because once you specialize, like all of us do, there is no way you're going to remember everything that you have learned in the undergraduate thing. So, I would say don't trust a blanket statement from a doctor. If it has to be a dietitian who has spent years studying that. Right?
Yeah. Um, and I by no means think that doctors are uninformed or uneducated on the whole about nutrition. I think even if like if you compare a doctor who happens to specialize in cardiac surgery or something with like your average kind of like layperson, so to speak, I think that it'll always be the case that the doctor has more information about the impacts of different nutritional components on
Definitely.
physiology. But I think definitely um, it can also be problematic to just appeal to authority, because like some people will say, oh, my doctor told me that I needed to eat meat to be healthy, for example. And then we're just like, well, um, what, like if somebody's not a doctor, then what are they going to be able to say, in the face of that? So
Yeah.
something to consider. um, I wanted to address this question from Carrie says, is it wrong to appeal to selfish health concerns, though, like weight loss for diabetes would be helpful for the person? Is that wrong? um, I don't think it's wrong, but I think it's kind of like the environmental, like, as far as what we're talking about, being veganism goes, um, we wouldn't appeal to um, somebody in telling them to not have human slaves as property by telling them that the slave ships that are bringing the slaves over are going to be really bad for the environment, or that, like, or it's going to pollute the environment, and then they're going to have to breathe in a lot of smog. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't say that. Yeah, if the outcome is vegan, um, then if they go vegan, then I mean, I don't know. I guess we just don't have a way of knowing that. I guess is the thing, is the issue. And I mean, if they eventually come around to not seeing non-human animals as property, I think that's wonderful. But I don't know. It's one of those things where I guess we don't know the consequence until it happens. So it's difficult to say something prescriptive about it. I would just say, we should advocate for the outcome that we want and do so based on the characteristics of the outcome. But a lot of times I have seen it be the case where a person has gone vegan and actually gone vegan because they were inspired by something health related, or because they were told by a yoga guru that they shouldn't pay for needless suffering and death of other animals, or because they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. I think that happens, and I think that those things are all potentially helpful, but I think that they can confuse us. Like, I don't think it's possible to go vegan for health. I think it's possible to go plant-based for health, but I don't think that, like, you know health is the common denominator when you think about being opposed to, like, the trading of wool and circuses and animal testing and all that stuff. But I think that it certainly is possible for somebody to go plant-based for their health and then eventually go vegan from that point on. And I think part of that might be because if you go plant-based for health, then you actually are kind of less motivated to argue for those practices, because once you're no longer participating in them, it it's like that cognitive dissonance thing that we talked about, where you don't really need to change your behaviors to go in line with your action, with your morals, rather. If you're already eating a fully plant-based diet, all you'd have to do then is just change your mental take on it, I guess, your values, I guess. But it's hard to see a scenario where somebody wouldn't be participating in animal exploitation and commodification entirely, just like as a coincidence, like without having reached an ethical stance on animals' property status. That would be a huge coincidence. If somebody was like, "Yeah, I'm not really sure what I think about veganism, but I don't eat honey, I don't wear wool, I don't buy products tested on animals or support zoos and things like that. But I just never considered whether or not I'm vegan." But I suppose it's possible. Akash, I think we should maybe go ahead and try to wrap up the discussion.
Yeah, it's been
Getting up
3
towards
years.
4 hours now.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time and coming on here. And I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to kind of talk about or say. I'd love to have another discussion at some point if we could. I think our discussions end up being really productive and insightful. So I think,
Yeah, sure. I think we haven't addressed vegan infighting fully, but I think we can do that next time.
that'd be great.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
great idea. And thanks for everybody who watched live, and thanks for everybody who watched later. Akash is hopefully going to be doing some YouTube production stuff of his own in the future, so we'll definitely keep you posted on that. And I really appreciate all the comments and questions and things like that. I think it's fun for me, at least, to address these questions, even if they can be sometimes what's the word I'm looking for? Difficult, I guess, for the lack of a better word. And hopefully Akash enjoys answering them too. I think it seems like we both really enjoy kind of like reflecting and hearing inputs.
and please point out where points where you disagree with me or think I'm wrong, because I love to be wrong, right? So that I can learn something and change.
Yeah, and I think it goes for all of us, who weren't raised vegan, that we've all admitted to ourselves that we were wrong about something. So, yeah, I think none of us are a stranger to reevaluating our positions on things in light of new
Yeah,
evidence um, reintegrating or integrating different behaviors and things like that also. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Shout out to all the people who, I don't know how many people stayed here for the whole thing. I think there were at least 4 people, but
wow.
you never know. But this was quite a long talk, but I enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks again, Akash. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, and we'll be hopefully talking
We'll be
again
in
soon.
touch.
All right,
Yeah.
take care, everybody. Have a great day.